Oh, good evening and welcome to the flagship broadcast of the Asatru Folk Assembly. I am Matt Flavel, the illustrious Harrier. Wait, I'm just reading the cue card there. No, I am Allen Turnage. I am the law speaker of the Asatru Folk Assembly. Um, I am up solo tonight because Matt can't find the on switch to his computer. So you may just have to listen to me for 2 hours or 15 minutes, however long I can stand to listen to myself talk and think. Um, so, as we all know, or maybe this is your first time in the show, we have been doing this series, Matt and I, or maybe Matt started doing this part of it and he just wants me to do it for a while. But this part is called Adulting with Allen, mainly, I guess, because I am the most adult-like chronologically, other than the illustrious leader of our and founders, Mr. McNallen, and his beautiful wife. So, and a couple of you guys are probably up there about where I am. I mean, I'm pushing 40. So I have made a lot of mistakes in a lot of areas of my life and tried to learn from those mistakes. And so we've been doing this series, Adulting with Allen. That's me. So I have been asked, what does adulting, what does this sort of thing have to do with the religion of Asatru? And the answer to me is that religion is about bettering ourselves. In addition to, of course, worshiping the gods and just demonstrating our fealty to our ancestors and to the holy powers, but also it is about making ourselves better people. Um, I even saw the Mupper sticker, although at the time I was too timid to display it, which said, Jesus loves you, but Odin wants you to grow up. So, along that line, Matt agreed to initiate this series with me, so that I could share a little bit of the life advice that I've accumulated over the many decades of my travels here through Midgard and try to pass a little bit of that on to you and hopefully take some feedback from you, answer your questions. And I will again remind you that I think of the show as a cumulative experience. The topics that we've talked about in the past, um, we've talked about debt management and finances and some other stuff along that line, health and medicine and working out and those sorts of things. And so if you have questions, if you had been watching the show at some point and thought, dang it, I wish I had asked Allen this question back when he was doing this broadcast originally, feel free to type that in and email it to our illustrious host, Nick. So he's behind the scenes back there and running the show and making sure that everything goes as it should, Matt's technical difficulties notwithstanding. So we're going to talk a little bit about marriage and relationships tonight. You may ask me, Allen, how is a single person like yourself qualified to speak on this topic? Um, well, good question. I have been told that I can be sort of a difficult person to live with because um, I have high expectations of myself and high expectations of those around me. And that has gotten in the way of my relationships, admittedly. I know that there are, and so that's one of the things that I want to sort of pass along to you tonight. Um, who's this guy? Do you want to introduce yourself or do you need to finish your gum over there or what?
No, I'll introduce myself. I apologize, guys. My computer decided right as I was trying to initiate the camera that it desperately needed a system update right this second. So I apologize for that. GW Farnsworth just donated $30 to us. I appreciate you very much.
Yeah,
You
I wanted to
always
say that.
start this show off with generosity. Well, something else I want to say about generosity. We have paid off Njordshof. This what is something I've hassled you guys about constantly recently, and we've been plugging away at now for almost 3 years, which, you know, for the amount that Njordshof was, is a tremendous accomplishment to get that done as quickly as we were able to. And it was due to your guys' generosity. And it's worth mentioning, it was due to one person's generosity in particular lately that paid off the entire remaining balance in one swoop.
And how much was that?
At the time he wrote the check, at the time he made the payment, like 38 and change, but overall he donated to a couple of other things. He made a donation of $41,000 and $41,480, I believe exactly. Which
that is spectacular.
It is the biggest.
That is a strong example to follow. So all the rest of you guys out there with $41,000,
it's amazing. So remember, Matthew Bean donated that much in one instance to help us and to show his appreciation and his worship for Lord Njordur. And we are extremely appreciative of that. We're kind of blown away. It's a little bit surreal. So
right.
That is truly awesome, because many of us sat jaws agape in awe about it. Well done. Thank you so much. And thank you all of you guys who've donated over the course of this and continue to donate. We really appreciate you guys, and it enables us to do really special things, and we're very appreciative. So thank you guys so much.
And it's wonderful that he did that much for us all at one shot. But the only reason that it was at 40,000 and not 140,000 where it should have been is that we have been chipping away at it by those hundreds and thousands of dollars that people have given. So, you know, it's so everybody helps.
That's a thing. This is kind of a overall giving philosophy that is important and has been very instrumental in our success in recent years. We're going to have people that, you know, do the best they can. Some people have a lot to give, some people have a little, but everybody doing it and doing it consistently and being committed to our goals and what we're trying to accomplish, that's what gets us there. We've reached a point with membership to where, you know, that's why I tried to break down the incremental, hey, if every member donated this much today, we'd pay it off. Because it puts some things in perspective. If everybody does what they can and everybody does a little bit, it makes a real big difference. So we appreciate that. This program in particular, you guys have been amazing with your generosity, and it's very, very much appreciated. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about it later in the show today. Alexander Casto, our amazing folk builder in Jacksonville, Florida, just bought us 3 coffees. It's a $15 donation. Thank you for that. Yeah, you guys are awesome. Wanted to plug a couple of other things with my normal top of the show stuff, and then we'll get back into wherever our Lawspeaker was taking us due to my absence. So first and foremost, if you can make it, Midsummer at Odenshof coming up soon, 27th through the 29th. That is at Odenshof in Brownsville, California. We would love to see you guys there. It's shaping up to be a big event. We have over 100 people registered right now, and we're still, you know, almost a month out. So this one's going to be a big one this year. We're celebrating 30 years of the Asatru Folk Assembly. We would love to have you there to celebrate with us. If you can do it, let's make it happen. I would love to meet you guys. Yeah, get with your local folk builder. We get you all set up. Also, the following month, Siggerbloat at Siggerheim in Jackson County, Tennessee. That's July 25th through the 27th. Lawspeaker, you can be able to make that?
Yes. Now that I know what it is.
Okay, perhaps our law speaker will join us there. I will certainly be there. Very excited. It's an amazing place.
July 25th.
There you go.
I'm making a note to myself.
Make your notes now, guys. Write it down. Make it happen. Would love to see you guys there. While you're at it, you might as well do both of those. But any of those you can make it to, again, contact your local folk builder. They'll get you all squared away. We would love to see you there. I would love to meet you guys and show off our really special sacred ground we have at both those locations. And the month following, in August, we have Freyfaxy at Baldershof. That is in Murdoch, Minnesota. That's August the 22nd through the 24th. That's going to be a spectacular event. Some amazing people. Wonderful place. I would love to meet you guys. I'd love to see you guys there. I would love to celebrate and worship with you guys. So if you can make any or all of those things, please do. And with that, we can go back into where you're taking us this week. Again, I'm sorry I showed up a little bit late today.
Hey, it's okay. I was having fun talking to myself. At least that way I know somebody's listening. So, although, of course, I sort of lost my place. Here's the way that, in thinking about this topic and trying to think about it in sort of an organized way, especially from the religious and more importantly, the traditional religionist viewpoint, I think we're in a hard place. As the AFA is starting to breach its way into relevance. And by that, I mean, we're in this part now of what a lot of us have heard, is the Overton window is moving in our direction. The traditionalist viewpoint is making a comeback. The traditionalist lifestyle is starting to appear again on the horizon. So we of the AFA are, of course, in the cutting edge, in the vanguard of that movement. Which brings me again back to sort of where I was thinking about it, like how is this a religious thing? And why is it important in the AFA to talk about and think about actively marriage and relationships? First, I think it should be noted, just as maybe as an aside, but all the big organized Christian faiths have marriage counseling programs. In fact, one of the office buildings that I go to regularly in my self-employment, I go through this big Christian wedding counseling thing where they have these big, nice offices and 6 or 8 paid staff, and they're trying to educate their people in the way of doing their, making their relationships better. And I think that's one of the things that because to use Founder McNallen's phrase, which I promoted for years, and I think is an important way to think about it, we are reaching critical density. We're reaching this point where we have enough local presence, we have enough online presence, where we have support groups for people that, we have Gothar and we have Gothies and Githias who can counsel people who are struggling with these sorts of issues. And so, and that is our job. That is our job to counsel people who are struggling with their own relationships, or, with the lack of relationship, or the just trying to navigate their way through the modern world in, in relationship to their gods and their ancestors. Now, and then, so where then do we find ourselves in this point in history? As we say in different contexts, and it's sad but true. It is the Kali Yuga. This is a time of dissolution. It's a time of chaos. Um, it's a wolf age when when there is lots and lots of disorder and chaos going on. Um, However, as the Baron pointed out, in the Kali Yuga, it is also easier to find enlightenment. It is easier to find self initiation in this time of chaos, because while um, disorder prevails, it is also a time when knowledge is less hidden. Things have been revealed that have been concealed for quite some time. And that is, I think, is why dharmic faiths are like ours are making their way back to the forefront, because um, while lines of transmission are scattered, but they're also more, they've opened, and so and whether that's just an adjunct of the age that we're in, or whether it's deliberate by those who have been keeping this flame for so long, I think it's important to understand that these ideas and ideals that we in the AFA promote, that these are the right way of living. And you can say that's judgmental or not. That's what we do. I mean, I think that's one of the shortcomings of one of the other dharmic faiths, is that, to try to be non-judgmental, I think is just wrong-headed. There is right way, there is a wrong way to do some things. There's some ground in the middle. There are lots of right ways to do it. There are lots of wrong ways to do it, but you can certainly at some point, you can, along this spectrum, you can hit a spot where there's wrong stuff over here, there's right stuff over here. And part of the job of the AFA, and we, Gothar, is to try to help each other as priests, and help everyone as members try to negotiate our way along that line, so that we live better lives that are more faithful to our own traditions and to our own um, fealty to our gods and to our ancestors. So, what am I talking about? One of the things that I've been reading a good bit about lately is, I've just finished Alain Benoit's book Against Liberalism, and one of the things that he points out, and it helped me frame what it is that we in the AFA are doing. It helped me understand it at a little bit more complex level, maybe. But liberalism, modern liberalism, is not just progressivism. Progressivism is one aspect of liberalism, but the primary distinction between liberalism and traditionalism is that tradition is about us. Tradition is about we. Tradition is all of us. Tradition is tribal. Tradition is about what is good for we. Liberalism is about what's good for me. What is the best decision that I can make? How can I actualize myself, and ignores the costs to other people's, to friends, family, um, tribe, nation, and ethnic. And that's the sort of thing where you can start to draw these lines of judgment in between. What's good for you as an individual may not be the best thing for your family, may not be the best thing for your um, people. And it's corny, sort of, how it's come back around to be this thing, but you do want to be a credit to yourself. You want to be a credit to your race. You want to be a credit to your ancestors. You want to be able to stand proudly and, could you say, look them in the eye? We're not positive that when you would cross the veil that it's going to work exactly that way. But when you meet your ancestors on the other side of Midgard's plane, you want to be able to say, I was a noble and rightful and upstanding representative of your lineage, and carried your name through my life in a way in which I can be proud to pass on to my children. And I know I haven't said very much yet about tonight's topic, but I'm just sort of laying the groundwork for the way that, because, there are books and libraries and um, millions and millions of dollars being made in family counseling and all that sort of thing. Um, but, but so I'm certainly not trying to take that place. I'm just trying to give us all some framework from which we can start to think about the ways that we can be better to each other and be better for each other. I've got some stuff that I've thought of in particular, based on my experience, some of which, of course, I've managed to stick my thumb in my own eye, and by making mistakes that I have lived to regret. I can tell you that prevention is better than um, apology, although one is not, one works well for the other two. Um, what I mean by that, certainly to get like to in my own particular way of what uh, the particularized examples, one of the couple things that I wanted to talk about in particular. One of the things is to fight fair. We disagree about things, and when I say we, I mean um, you and your significant other, you and your wife, you and your girlfriend are going to disagree about stuff. Some of it can be petty, um, but it can blow up into something big at the time if you let it. One of the things then that you have to do, it seems to me, is number one, is to maintain some perspective, right? How torqued, how upsetting is it because your girlfriend keeps closing the door of the seatbelt in your car, or she mispronounces these couple of words that get under your skin a little bit. Those are the kinds of things that if you let it grate at you, it's like sand in your shoe, right? It can erode and chafe, but you have to think about, like, in the great grand scheme of things, this is the woman I love. This is the man that I love. It's okay if he stumbles around a little bit and makes some mistakes, because I make mistakes too. So you do something bad, I do something bad. But, in the great grand scheme of things, we live a life of joy. We live a life of happiness and gratitude. And if we can do that as the framework for um, our relationship, then we can get past these small, petty um, disagreements that otherwise can present big stumbling blocks. I think it's important when people have disagreement to, number one, to fight fair. And I am, used to be, um, pretty bad at, uh, you know, having the scathing comeback rather than addressing the disagreement. Okay. If we're talking about what color to paint this wall, okay, or, you spilled the mustard on my nice dress. Okay. Well, remember that time that you did that and it made me mad? Well, it's not about that. Fight fair, love each other. And remember that the goal of this is for the center to hold, for us to keep ourselves together in a way that allows us to promulgate our faith and to be examples to the folk without, that our faith and our practitioners of our faith can be a positive influence in the direction of the world. Feel free to break in edgewise.
All
I
right.
know
So
I'm short
no, it's good. While
sermonizing.
while we're on the point of inevitable arguments and fights over stuff, I think it's very important to possess, or at the very least to develop and work towards possessing, emotional control over what you're doing and enough step back perspective to examine what your goal is in the argument. We are very used to, in different circumstances in our life, trying to win a confrontation for the sake of defeating a foe. One of the things, this is kind of meta, but it does go into play here. One of the reasons that strife amongst kinsmen was such a problem to our ancestors is there's no winning when you're fighting people on your team. Like, the victory's hollow because, yay, if you win, you've just, slain your brother or stolen your cousin's stuff. Your family is still less for it.
Right.
And that's one of the things in relationships most of the time. There's absolutely important enough things that you need to put your foot down on, or that are fundamental that you need to get corrected. But the point of the argument isn't defeating your opponent. Your opponent is someone who ought to be on your team. It's not about winning. It's about communicating the thing that you need to get addressed or want to express to the one that you love, not about defeating them with clever stratagems or attacks, or, you mentioned you mentioned having the quick comeback. That's awesome in life. If you're able to be really good at arguing and you're able to debate well and you have that chambered, but it's really important not to take cheap shots that you don't need to with someone you love. It's very often that people get wrapped up in the emotion of things and they take those shots when they shouldn't. Being able to have enough peace of mind that you can step away from an argument, at least in your head for a second, reevaluate what you're trying to accomplish and adjust your tone and your tactics towards the thing you're trying to accomplish. And I don't mean this as nebulous as this. Like, every couple fights about stuff. Sometimes you fight over stupid little things. Sometimes it's a bigger thing. And sometimes, like Alan mentioned earlier, well, I think he alluded to this earlier. Little things, if built up and not expressed, and you dwell on, can often end up, stuff becomes a proxy war for bigger issues. You fight over some misplaced dish in the kitchen, and it has nothing to do with that. It has something to do with a lingering pattern of feeling disregarded or whatever else. But it comes out over the stupidest little thing. I think it's extremely important, and I'm going to answer Trent's question now because I think it fits. Says, what are your thoughts on the advice never to go to bed angry at each other? That's something I've heard time and again from couples that have been successful over the long run. And it's something I believe really strongly. And I'm sure that we all have our ways of processing things, but I can't speak strongly enough about the benefit of getting past stuff. Put it out there, have the conversation. Don't put it off and dwell on it and be passive aggressively angry at your partner. That's ridiculous, but it's all
Right.
too common for a variety of reasons.
And what's that difficult word that you're trying to get to that it took me listening to you to be able to think about it? Communicate. Communicate. I don't like it when you hide my plate in the other drawer where I want it in this drawer. That's and then you get you have the discussion and everybody gets through it.
Or when your wife puts a piece of Tupperware that doesn't fit where you think it should be, you hide it someplace that she can't reach, and then it doesn't reoffend.
That's a good strategy. I'm gonna.
I may or may not have employed that strategy. Seriously, communication is really, really important. All these things they sound so, I don't know, hippie and like, they sound silly sometimes because they're small and they're obviously common sense, but they're things that certainly I'm speaking a lot of this from experience of things I've learned through success and through many failures in my life. And I believe it's stuff that Alan probably comes to these conclusions and this knowledge honestly through School of Hard Knocks on too. It's important to communicate stuff, and it's important to not only send out communication, but receive and internalize communication from your spouse as well. That's very important. Often when we argue or we're in the midst of something, we're so quick to think of the next thing we're going to say or the argument we're going to make to refute them, that we don't stop to appreciate the thing that they're saying and the way that something is affecting them or making them feel. And again, the argument is about communication and getting each other's needs met, not about winning and destroying your opponent. Not if you plan on maintaining your relationship with your opponent. If you're all the way done, then cool, go for it. But if your goal on the other side of it is to have a stronger marriage or a stronger relationship, that goal has to be in mind on how you conduct your squabbling in between there.
Absolutely. And the and it's difficult. A lot of these topics are hard to discuss. It's stuff that we have been raised to avoid. Talking about money. One of the things that I do, and before I uh, do a marriage, is I talk to the couple about, these are things you're gonna, you have to have a common viewpoint about money. You have to have a common way of dealing, of at least approaching the problem, right? Because the old saying that opposites attract is wildly untrue. The thing that makes a strong, lasting relationship is people who have a common centric idea about, you know, how to raise the kids, how to, do we spend money? Do we save money? Do we buy the latest thing or do we wait? Those are the kinds of things that if you don't think that out ahead of time, and especially once you are married, if you don't talk about it in a in a rational, loving, understanding way, those are the kinds of things that can build that simmering resentment, when you're still paying off the credit card from that $600 handbag that she bought. And then you go out and buy a $800 pistol because, you know, your other pistol was lost in a tragic boating accident. So you needed to replace it. So those are the kinds of things that, and then instead of maintaining that common goal of, let's save up so we can buy a house, or let's save up to pay off a house, or let's spend less money so we can give more to the AFA, you end up where you're spending so much money on credit card interest that you forgot my first lecture back there where I told you not to do that. So those are certainly the kinds of things that that the more you talk about it, the more open that you are, and that's where so some of the rest of the kind of big picture stuff starts to come in. Um, I think one of the things that the progressives uh, have done, I think for the better, is to get us back in the habit of talking about these sorts of things. I don't really know that much about my own parents' relationship, but I certainly know a lot about the relationship of a lot of other adults of their era, and they didn't talk about money or they didn't talk about those sorts of things. They would just they would do and didn't have the most for the most part didn't have the kind of wealth that we have to negotiate our way through right now. But um, it was just the era where it was just those sorts of things were not talked about. I think though it is important now that we are getting to this era, and I'm not a real big fan of talk therapy and that sort of thing, but I do think that it's important to avoid having to go to therapy by um, having your wife, your husband as your sounding board, as your best friend. But that brings up one of the things I want to talk about. So I think one of the things that makes this Kali Yuga era, and I'll try to stop saying that. One of the things that makes the modern era difficult to navigate our way through is that we've been raised on the culture of easy solutions, um, not just pop psychology, but movies and especially sitcoms and those sorts of things have taught us that you can have a great big gut wrenching, nearly life ending fight, and then patch it all up in an hour and a half and have time to you know the do a bunch of other stuff too. Reality is not that way. Reality is messy. There's always a long tail to these sorts of things, which is why it's important not to go to bed angry, because those sorts of long-term lingering resentments are the sorts of things that make you fight unfairly when it comes back to your turn. When you feel aggrieved rather than um, trying to rationalize to a solution, like Matt, like you were talking about. All you want to do is lash out because you're trying to get some get back for the time that you got your feelings hurt. And I can tell you that's not a good way to run a household.
So some of these things, and it's hard because the second we get on discussions of relationships and marriage and stuff, it immediately we default our greatest wisdom on that isn't drawing nuggets from the lore. It's us talking about very personal, often very painful life experience and the lessons that we've learned because of it. And so, I just sharing some of that's going to come from our own experience on this. But I noticed in the comments section, Rachel mentions, well, what if you're angry because you're tired and you need to go to bed to have some perspective, and in the morning, maybe it won't be a big deal. And don't mistake what I'm saying. I don't think necessarily everything needs to be resolved 100%. But in the midst of I tell you what, one of the most miserable things that I can comprehend is existing knowing that the person I deeply love and care about is angry at me. I hate that. It is cruel in a way to allow that feeling to linger with your partner, especially if there's somebody that processes things that way. If your goals in your relationship, and this may be really different if you're just dating somebody or whatever, but we're talking about serious relationships tonight and marriages. There comes a point where your values need to be, when you're assessing stuff, you have a responsibility towards your partner's best interest. And I think all too often, especially when things are very personal and we're hurt, to think about ourselves and not think about our partner's interest. There's something coming together, make peace, telling each other you love each other, giving each other a hug, and coming to a more comfortable state to go to bed on is very valuable. Doesn't mean everything necessarily needs to be 100% resolved, but coming back to a place where there's not open hostility is always an advisable thing. People tend to stew on stuff. And one of the things, and guys probably do this too, but I know that women often do this, and I've often been the subject of this poorly. And ladies listening to this, please realize this is two guys that have been through stuff. We're going to have some women-specific trauma on here that you guys probably have experienced in a different way and different things. But I have been unfairly judged for imaginary conversations that my imaginary stand-in has had because arguments went on in somebody's head. And that it's funny because when you have imaginary arguments, but with a real person, but in your head, if you have enough of them and you spend enough time dwelling on them, your brain doesn't categorize them as imaginary. They have the same response and the same memory as if they were real. And you carry over that resentment from things that, you wish you would have said into the real world. And it sounds really silly, but I think, a lot of us have probably experienced that in our life.
And you have to be on the watch out for that on both sides of that. I have certainly misinterpreted the way that things were said because I take it out into this very different arc in what was intended. So so if at the time, and I'm not saying I do it all the time now. I mean, it's easy to think about it in the abstract and say, well, you should communicate and take a breath and take a step back. But when your adrenaline's up and it's stuff's going on, it's not always easy to keep perspective. But I do sometimes manage to say, what do you mean by that? I clarify how you mean that term. That could mean one of 17 things up along the spectrum. So did you mean A or did you mean R? And then, oh, okay. Well, okay. If that's how you meant it, then okay. Then that's not bad. I can accept that criticism. Speaking of which, I think another important thing that I may not have been all that good about my previous life style is to say, that you're wrong. Just admit that sometimes, rarely, you can be wrong in the way that you do stuff or in what you said or how you approach something or whether it's facts or attitudes or just in general, and when you're wrong, just say it. You're not, it's like it's like you said, that, that's, you're not, that doesn't move you down the totem pole because you made a mistake. I mean, this is not some kind of scoring system where making a mistake is going to clip a corner off your man card. It's going to make your relationship better. So the rest of the stuff doesn't matter, you know. Um, you can puff your chest out to your buddies, and then when you come home, okay, I shouldn't have done that, I shouldn't have said that. I was wrong, you were right. That's that I think is an important thing. And to take blame for the mistakes that you make and to atone for those. Because that's one of the things that um, we recognize. I think Steve's book does a great job of illustrating that, is that our relationships in this sort of way, and this is what I was, and this relates back to what I was talking about the tribalism aspect um, and the relationship. It's the horizontal plane, right? Our relationships, the duties that we owe each other, of fealty and loyalty and um, good faith and all those sorts of things. It's important to maintain. And the way that you do that is by accepting your part of the blame. When you make a mistake, hey, I screwed up, shouldn't have done that. You'd be surprised how much that can take the wind out of an argument.
1,000%. A lot of, as a people, we are very ill raised and ill equipped to do this right. We have consumed a lot of very poor examples and very poor signaling in our lifetimes. And one aspect of that, one way that displays itself, we are very reluctant to admit fault and to take responsibility. And oftentimes, especially in a healthy relationship where it's not always about winning and it's not about any of the toxicity that we talked about, but when it is about feeling heard and feeling respected or appreciated, what Alan was saying a second ago really rings true. Somebody being able to be like, okay, stop. Thinking about it, you know what? You're absolutely right. I'm very sorry I did that. I will try not to do that in the future. That fixes a lot of stuff. Those things are very hard for some people to say, but they make a world of difference if they're done sincerely. That can really fix a lot of things. So many times, relationship arguments are about feeling heard, getting it off your chest, and feeling like your thoughts and feelings matter to the other person. Taking the time to acknowledge that and make that really known does a lot to help get through rough spots or, placate bruised feelings.
And I think it's important, and I hadn't even thought about it that way, but I think it's important what you said, I won't do that again. That's I made a mistake that will not reoccur. That's because a lot of times that's why I think that's why people are so defensive about stuff, it is not just that one time of when we got our feelings hurt, but the fear that it could happen again. And I think assurance that that it's not going to happen again is goes a long way toward mending that rift. So something else, and that I'll chatter about for a second, because it may not be something that is that rings true for most people, but one of the things that we actually, I read about this. It was peripheral to some of the stuff that Jordan Peterson was talking about at one point. But um, it's it's the idea that in the modern world, in the liberal world that we have created, is very atomized, and for most people, we have been pulled away from lots and lots of our support systems. I mean, we grew up, I don't mean we individuals, but like we evolved, we over the hundreds of thousands of years, knowing intimately maybe a couple of hundred people, but knowing them very well and knowing and being in totally enmeshed in this society where people knew each other. And so if you got out of line, the rest of the town bring you back in. If you were offended, or like if you were having problems with your spouse, you could go to your cousin or your best friend or your family, who was all within easy reach of where you were, number one. And then number two, and I try not to over romanticize the past, it was harsh and unyielding in many ways, but it's also, I think, important to recognize that we were embedded in a support system that allowed us to have better understanding and better proportionality to these sorts of things, both because there was that when something went wrong, there were dozens of people there to try to help you make it better, but also because your spouse, your partner, was not the all and everything that it has come to be for a lot of people. You know, if you uh, move, especially two or three times, like we're, the like for me when I went to college, I left my hometown. I went to college. I left college. I went to a different place to work. I left that place to go to law school. I left that place to go to. So in all these travels, my supply lines got thinner and thinner, and my cohort group shrank to this point where where a lot and I think it's true for a lot of people. The modern condition is that your your spouse ends up being your entire support network, and it's very fragile in that way. And that's one of the things that's yet another reason why I'm so supportive of the Asatru Folk Assembly, is that we are building this network of friends and confidants and priests and counselors and all that stuff. So when things do go astray, we can count on each other to offer perspective and guidance and comfort and all the things that are necessary to try to navigate the brutal reality of the Kali Yuga. I said that again. I said I wasn't going to. Matt?
Well, I'd like to throw in, following right along those lines. There was a time to where you had parents and perhaps grandparents and an extended group of people in your social circle, in your local community, your church leaders, various other things, to where they could help smooth those things over, help give you perspective. You could run things by your elders, and they could talk to you about things that they've learned and wisdom that they have in their years. And in the world outside of the AFA, that's very hard to come by in a lot of our lives. Within the AFA, That's not the case. I've watched so many people be benefited, those who want to actively be a part of our AFA family by having people to talk to. Our Gothar counsel people about their relationship issues, their marriage, someone somewhere at least weekly, but very often. And that's a really important tool to be able to go to somebody and get some wisdom on that. I talk with the Gothar often about, every year that goes by, our Gothar have a deeper well of experience to draw from. We're able to talk to each other and share the collected wisdom and life experience of every other AFA Gothi or Githya that's ever been. And to take that and to apply it to helping our folk in the best way possible. That is a tremendous resource that we have for our folk, and I've watched it be extremely helpful. One of the things that's helpful on that, and just putting it out there, our Gothar are very happy to help you and your partner through problems in your marriage or whatever else. And we have enough Gothar now that, you guys can do it through one Gothi or one Githya, or there's the option of each party having their own Gothi or Githya they're talking to that can help advocate for them and help them sort their stuff out. There's a lot of good options, and I would encourage everybody, if they find this, and it doesn't have to be when you're at the point of crisis. If you just need some advice in your relationship, we would all love to help you to the very best of our ability. We're all committed to seeing AFA families succeed. And so working towards that and helping you all work towards that in your own life is something that we're all aboard trying to help with.
Big time.
So what do you have on the agenda from here?
I have a few other sorts of specific things. I don't know how much we want to get into dealing with specifics. I think a lot of it has to do with, the culture that we're trying to navigate. We sometimes use the word conservative. I really prefer the word traditional now, where we have a very traditional viewpoint on sex roles, on approaches to life in general, and so approaches to relationships. And I know it's difficult for the younger guys to try to get their way through that, because young white men, are tending to be much more conservative now, traditional, and young white women are veering off into a much more progressive mindset for the most part. And these are, of course, generalizations, but those are what the polling numbers show. That, and I have a lot of empathy for guys who are finding it difficult to approach women, and actually, one in part of the prep that for today's show, one of the things I read, one of the articles I read about was that men have been cowed by this idea that even looking at a woman is, some kind of sexual assault. So they try to stay so far back from giving any kind of offense that they don't even manage to even talk to women, and it's difficult. I mean, women have been trained by the blue-haired mob to be hypersensitive to like a guy talking to you or whatever. And it's absurd how triggered they can be by just a simple conversation. And I have a lot of sympathy for our guys out there trying to chat up a girl, right? Because back in the old days, I guess it's sort of easier for me because girls don't see me as a threat. So I can comment on stuff and then I'm just, for me, it's just a brush. But it's, you know, and maybe part of it is that our guys need to have maybe be a little less aggressive. And I know that's sort of contradictory, right? But you have to be able to talk to women, but you have to do it in a way where you're not being hyper aggressive toward any kind of sexual content, toward any kind of even relationship content to begin with. You can have a conversation with a girl and maybe it goes somewhere, maybe it doesn't. I think so. I think that it's been harmed on both sides of that equation by um, too many of our men absorbing the wrong lessons from like the pickup culture. I think that's terrible uh, approach to living a life. It's a terrible approach to the way that you would try to manage relationships with women, because to the extent that anybody wants to hear it, you know, that sort of life is empty. It's devoid of content. It is vapid and shallow. And what we should be striving for as men is to have deep, meaningful relationships with beautiful, intelligent women. And so that's what I have, and it's good. And I consider myself lucky in that vein. Um, Feel free to agree with that, Matt. The and it's but so one of the things and this may be a little tricky topic to talk about in our show, but I think pornography is a is terrible. It's a horrible um, mass delusion that has been foisted on our civilization by those who will not be named, and it gives young men especially, terrible, horrible, wrong ideas about women, and again about you know, we're all sexual beings, but that's not the most important thing in a relationship. And if you and but having that wrong nature about what relationships are for and what it is that you're looking for when you talk to a girl at the bookstore. Um, it can, if your mind is always in that one direction, it makes it really difficult to build anything that is historically, and by historically, I don't mean like it's going to be epic, you know, um, a romance that will be remembered for decades, centuries to come. Well, the historiography of relationship building is about the small things. It's about the inside jokes that only you get. It's about building a history of, that time you went to the Italian restaurant and the waiter spilled the water on your dress. I mean, those are the kinds of things that allow you to have a history with a person that will withstand the trials of whatever it is that you're arguing about the next time, because it's the slow build, it's laying foundation on those kinds of things that allow you to um, make a strong and lasting relationship. Sex is good, don't get me wrong, but it's not but the but there's more to it. I remember, oh, who's the guy? Um, is it Eddie Van Halen? You know, you got to do something for the other 16 hours of the day.
Well, so I'd like to, I think this is in keeping with it. First, Paul in South Carolina donated $75 to Thorshoff. Thank you, Paul. We appreciate it very much. There is and I want to speak to the problem and then talk about solutions on it. I don't want to just endlessly dwell on the negativity of it, but there's a lot of really competing factors. We don't have the same traditional structures that we had that helped the more socially reserved to build relationships. We're atomized. We're very isolated in a lot of ways. We're in closer proximity than we've ever been before, but the average person feels more isolation than they've ever felt. We, through, Alan mentioned pornography, but also think through, online hookup apps and whatever else.
Yeah.
I think there is an idea by guys, at least, that they're going to all of a sudden be able to get all this opportunity to get laid by all these chicks all the time. That's not what the statistics show. What the statistics show is that, no, the same super high value guys that the chicks go after normally, now they're just getting all the chicks and there's still none to go around for these guys. So we've got a generation of young men that get told by the media and by all of the messaging that everything about masculinity and about them is bad. But they get countersignaled because reality doesn't change and hormones don't change. So these women want these masculine dudes, but society has trained our men to not display that properly. So they're either super soft and super weak, or they have some kind of strange metastasized idea of masculinity that gets displayed in a really negative way because there's not a healthy outlet for it. And that's a challenge. I know that young men, a lot of the issues with sex have to do with confidence. A lot of young men don't feel confident because they feel like they cannot be successful with women. And they don't get that attention or that affirmation. And they're like, man, how do I get chicks? Oh, well, you got to be confident. Well, how are you confident? By relying on your successes you've had in the past with women. And it's this cycle that unless something steps in to break it, or unless you're innovative and you're able to find your niche to where you can break that circuit, what I find a lot is young men being very desperate. So they end up either with a very poor attitude about women, with a very unrealistic expectation of what they get resentful and feel entitled to, or they settle for someone that they are very quickly feel resentful that they settled for. And I would encourage a number of things. As the Asatru Folk Assembly, we have access to a community of people that we can help. So one thing, when people traditionally found themselves, there's two single people in a church and they don't know how to talk to each other, and they're, getting a little long in the tooth to be single, the old ladies in the church kind of, figure it out and push them together and arrange for them to have a conversation. And that was a very effective tool. You'd have brothers, sisters, older siblings that were able to help, set you up with their friend or whatever, or maybe they'd break the ice for you and be your wingman on stuff and help, break the social barrier that you're facing.
Awkwardness that we all feel in that posture.
Yeah, we have, and I don't know how it is for the ladies, but I know for men that can be crippling. And you find yourself with an increased desperation the more time that passes, that you're not building success with women, the more resentful and the more metastasized your own needs and desires become. And the further you feel out of reach being successful is. And that's really unfortunate. And I see that in our circles all the time. I think,
and there's no easy answer,
no,
to that sort of thing. And, and it's certainly right to say that, that women and men too are attracted to confidence. Although confidence, as you say, confidence is about your own accomplishments. It's not about acting confident. And that sort of hubris and arrogance is the sort of thing that that is easily detected. So you can be confident because you're a good provider, because you're a good carpenter, because you have life skills. Those are the sorts of things that, despite the shallow culture of the internet, and that's one of the reasons why I harp on everybody being on their phone all the time, is the more of this crap culture that you brush against, the more it reduces your own personhood. And a good guy and a good woman can still make it in this era. It's just hard to get that first introduction a lot of times.
So something I'd like to say too that I think is of vital importance and is probably going to hurt some people's feelings, but truth is one of our virtues. We all find ourselves at different points. If you are single, from day one, get at the beginning of a potential relationship, make very clear the core things that you need out of a relationship moving forward, and don't assume you can work on them over time. And I say that things like fundamental worldview, things like religion, things like future goals, you are setting yourself up for failure if people, hi, I'm a Christian, I'm a super leftist, and I don't want kids. Well, that's okay. I can work on her, and over time it's not impossible, but it is very likely to cause you a lot of heartache and a lot of internal battles with yourself, and thus battles with the one that you care about over time. Don't do that if you can avoid it. I have been that desperate young man that found himself in whatever I could get because low self-esteem, not a track record of a lot of success. I've been there and I've felt that, and it's miserable. And so you make compromises and then you find yourself unhappy in your life. Don't do that. I've in my life, I've been in relationships with people who shared my values and relationships with people who didn't share my values at all. And I can tell you, finding a woman who shares my worldview, who is Asatru, who is committed to supporting the lifestyle and the life that I want to have for myself and my family, until you have that, you may not realize the difference it makes, but it makes a massive difference. Establishing up, and so your list of required things can't be as long as your arm. You need a couple of core value things. And you also need to not be. So women are not your AI girlfriend that you're creating on your computer.
Right.
They're living, breathing people. And if you do not find yourself currently in the company of amazingly beautiful women that have all of the things going for them that you wish they had, maybe your market share is not such that you can demand the most perfect specimen of whatever you think you need to have. You need to be realistic. So I think that being realistic and prioritizing to the things that are important matters a lot. I also think, kind of something that Alan was saying with the history that you develop with someone, with the inside jokes and the subtle things, your attraction to the person you with can't be just sexual. Yes, you need to be sexually attracted to the person that you're with. Don't compromise on that, because you may think that you can go without it and that's not a big thing and it'll develop or whatever. Chances are that's not the case. So don't set yourself up for failure, but it can't be just about that. Over time, you want somebody who is going to be supportive of the life that you want, who's going to help you succeed in the life that you want, that you're going to enjoy spending time with. Alan mentioned earlier that in the world we live in today, our spouse makes up a much greater percentage of our time than at previous times. They can be the entirety of your family and the entirety of your friend circle, depending on your circumstance and where you face yourself. This is your partner. Have someone that you like and that's your friend and that you can get along with and that you enjoy their company, because you're going to be sharing a lot of each other's company. So that compatibility is real important. But what I'd like to say too, before I get off my soapbox here, is help each other. And we do this in the AFA. Unfortunately, as is true all over the place, men are not in as high of demand as women are. And I think men face that a lot and feel that a lot. I wish I could make it magically different for you. It's not the world we live in right now. But lots of single ladies in the AFA, lots of single gentlemen. Let's help each other to break through those things that hold us back from having the kind of lives that we want. If there's social awkwardness amongst our brothers and sisters in the AFA, let's help break down those barriers. Let's help role model success and successful families and relationships. And let's help build that, not just for ourselves, but once we've found it, let's help others to build that too. If we are concerned for their well-being, we as a community can do a lot to help build and foster the development of families. And that's one of the most beautiful things I've seen in the Asatru Folk Assembly is people building families within the AFA. And we're now at a point watching those families grow up that it's really special. And it's proof that this, it can happen. It's a thing. A number of us have found ourselves there. I built my family in the AFA. Quentin Erickson, our esteemed colleague, he and his wife, Katie Erickson, they built their family within the AFA. Watching these families develop is a beautiful thing. There's plenty of hope. There's lots of good stuff. Don't be forlorn. Me and Alan are talking about a lot of the negative things because we're trying to give you things to avoid or things to get past. There's a whole lot of success out there to be had if we help one another. And also if we don't treat everything with the impermanence that is so, we're in a culture where everything is disposable. I've seen as a sad truth, everybody's job seems to be the new thing that is the indispensable thing. Relationships are disposable. All too often, people's core values or their religious choices are disposable if it's preventing them from getting laid. I'm not trying to be crass. That's just something that I see a lot. But man, they won't take a day off from work. They've got to punch that clock. We should reevaluate some of our priorities to make sure we're putting those in the right place.
And, you know, and it can be difficult. It certainly was for me during various periods of my life when things were not going as I thought they should. But certainly it's been easier since I found Asatru and since I found the traditionalist worldview, which meshes well with what I have always known. But one of the things that um, as Matt, as you've said, number one, that we don't talk about enough is love, that we love each other. We love our faith. We love our ancestors. But I think too, the, you know, the is to live a life of joy. It's to be open to those sorts of things, and bad things happen, good things happen. But if you're open to the experience and love your fate and love your life, that will overcome a lot of other stuff. If you're just and again, women can sense the guy creeping on them, right? But if you're just there and celebrating yourself and celebrating the joy of being alive, that can get you past a lot of that initial awkwardness that people feel in the presence of new people.
So, ladies, help us out. Women have a very particular and a very powerful ability to manipulate social situations. And I don't use the word manipulate in a bad way, but to shape social interaction. And I'm not saying that you need to take one for the team and date these guys that you don't want to be with or whatever. I mean, do that if you want to. But what I'm saying is help folks out. If you are a good-looking woman, you treating somebody like they matter and making them feel special goes a long way to signaling to the other women in the room and to the other men in the room to give that person a certain amount of value in how they deal with them. It can make a world of difference. I'm not saying lead them on or anything else that way. I'm just saying treating our shy gentlemen that are working on fixing it with some positivity and not making them feel like they've got 6 heads when they decide to have the audacity to talk to you, it goes a long way. And I think that if you've got it figured out, this for men and women, let's help each other so that everybody else can have the happiness that we've found. I wish when I was growing up, and I say when I was growing up, but as a young man, I had people to help me through a lot of things, and I wouldn't have made some of the stumbles that I made in my life. I'd like to be able, when I notice that, to help our young men and women to avoid those to the best of my ability. And if we're all doing that and looking out for each other, I think there's a lot to be said for that and a lot to be gained from it. The other thing I want to say that's just miserable and is epidemic amongst our folk and probably Western society as a whole. Give thought to the person that you procreate with. I have seen the most horrendous and ugly custody situations by young people who just kind of made babies without any thought to how they're going to raise them or towards the future. And I've seen a lot of kids very badly affected by that. And I've seen a lot of young men and women just devastated by the reality of that situation.
And sometimes it's absolutely, I don't think it's total thoughtlessness. For a lot of people, they're in a relationship and then they find Asatru. But I think some of those core values, the traditionalist viewpoint, the ideas about race and tribe, those should have been sorted out before the marriage. And if you're compatible with that other 88%, then the rest of it you can negotiate your way through oftentimes. But you're exactly right. Some and this is just this transitional age that we're living in. It's difficult, and I certainly don't claim to know the answer. It's one of the things that caused my divorce. It's not. There's no easy answer to it, but it's something you got to think about.
We all find ourselves, and here's the thing, and this is true of every topic we talk about, certainly on the Adulting with Allen episodes, but also on any of the others. You are where you are. You can't go back. You can't undo things. You're in the situation that you're in, and you've got to start from here to get wherever else you're going. But I say this for the people out there who can affect that. You save yourself a lot of heartache if you plan a little bit ahead of time, because it is very, very easy to get caught up emotionally in romantic situations. And it can become very overpowering to your better judgment. And I think men and women alike maybe experience it differently, maybe a lot of it experience the same, but we have all been made to behave foolishly due to, lustful / romantic circumstances in our lives. If you have planning before you get in the situation, you're better served than if you're just reacting to the hand you're dealt. I think, most everybody listening to this show know what goes where and how babies are made. A little bit of caution before you start a family with somebody that you don't want to necessarily think about raising the family with would do everybody a lot of good. And again, I'm talking in reserved terms, not to be soft on it, but to be flexible. Life's life, and we all find different spots. And I'm not going to get on here and, tell you an unrealistic purity spiral of things. I'm just saying, as Aryan men and women, we have an inherent nobility and responsibility that comes with it to try to make the best choices that we can. And I'm saying, so we kind of started off today's show talking about fighting and the arguments that come in a relationship. One of the biggest elements of the soul sickness our people find ourselves in is the fact that we don't live whole lives that mesh together and synergize. We're one guy at work, and I know plenty of people like this when they find Asatru. And again, some of them have already made commitments and choices in their life. But if you have to be secretive about who you are in your marriage, or who you are at work, or who you are in relationship to your politics, to your core value, to your religious affiliation, to who you are as a father, who you are as a husband, the more of those things that are incongruent, the more problems metastasize and the more heartache that you have in your life trying to reconcile them. The more you can structure from day one a life that all synergizes and matches up with one another or with each piece, that really is such a fundamental key to your overall health and well-being, is the idea of being whole. And you do that by all those pieces matching up. The more they don't match, the more it wears over you over the course of your life.
Whole and holy have the same root word, and that's certainly an Aryan concept that things that are elegant um, and holistic and whole are the holy things. And once you find that, this is going to bring up the other point that I wanted to make. And before we start going to questions, maybe the other point that I wanted to make is to express gratitude. Um, it's one of the things that I think people have, even in a relationship, you have this inherent idea that, that if I say, I need you, I'm grateful for what you did, that's going to make you less because you're relying on them. And that, it's the exact opposite, because the more you build your partner up, the more you build yourself up. Because, that's the team. So
Austin in Wisconsin donated $50 to the steeple. I appreciate you, Austin. Thank you very much. And Adrian in Minnesota donated $25 to the steeple and $25 to VNS. Thank you both. We appreciate you guys very much.
And Anna didn't ask me. She asked you what you're drinking. But I'm going to answer, even though she didn't answer me, because I'm drinking homemade Gatorade. How's that for exotic and traditional? A hipster taught me how to make it.
I was going to say, if it's what I think it is, it's super traditional.
It's Posca. It's a takeoff on Posca, and it's the drink that won the world. It conquered the world. The Romans.
Not Germania.
True.
So I am drinking a fine Chianti, gifted to me by an AFA friend. Thank you, Roy. And it's quite delicious. It's been a long time since I had Chianti, so I'm excited about it. So, Alan, do you have more on the front end, or would you like to start going to questions?
Now let's go to questions. I as you know, I could talk all day and often do, but let's see what it is that our audience wants to dig into on detail.
All right. Well, Tyler would like to dig into, hey there, question in regards to marriage and family. How should someone who is interested in Asatru and who holds to the values of the AFA navigate a situation where their spouse is perhaps hesitant to explore religions outside of Christianity due to both social and spiritual fears? In my appears there's more to this question. In my situation in particular, I also have a stepdaughter whose father is a Christian pastor. So needless to say, that also complicates my family situation. I would be interested in getting involved in the AFA, so I'm trying to figure out how best to navigate that situation as well. Thank you and much love to the AFA. Well, thank you, Tyler. We appreciate you asking, and we appreciate your support of the Asatru Folk Assembly and desire to get more involved. Alan, how would you like to take a swing at that?
Right. Well, it's especially tough when the partner is, her father's a pastor, because you're not going to convert him, and that he is going to be openly resistant to his daughter straying very far from his faith. I think and this is one of the things that I've been trying to work on, like in our own lexicon in general. But I think the important thing is to demonstrate and emphasize the the commonality between Christianity and Asatru, the values, the underlying values. Obviously, the religious stuff is quite distinct, but um, I think paganism, and which we are certainly in that broad category of religious practice, has gotten a bad rap, has gotten a bad reputation, and rightly so, because of the practitioners of Wicca, mostly, um, and other pagan faiths, rightly criticized by Benoit and others as, just being anti-traditional, anti-family, anti-traditional relationship, and so there's this broad brush that people paint pagans with, and it's because the Wiccans are 50 years ahead of us on the curve of breaking out into modern society, and because they are accepted by the um, progressivist uh, ideology, then they can afford to be open and aggressive about their faith and practice in a way that is sometimes dangerous for us. Um, all that being said, when you're up close and personal, like around the dinner table, the thing to emphasize is, you know, the AFA believes in families. The AFA believes in strong familial relationship. The AFA believes in um, men and women being two different sexes and without any overlap. And those are the kinds of things that should ring true to the father, the pastor. To talk about the respect that we have for tradition, the respect that we have for our ancestors, the respect that we have for, um, and I don't want this to sound the wrong way, but the respect that we have for others of different faiths, most different faiths, but and not to be negative, hyper negative about it. Well, you Christians stole our stuff, and Easter's not about Jesus, it's about bunnies. And, you know, as I've said in other contexts, one of the, most AFA members have matured out of that. There used to be a lot of that. A moot would be lots and lots and lots of Christian bashing, and then we'd have a moot and go home. We're past that. And so the way to sell your spouse and at least get your father, her father, a little bit on your side is to emphasize how congruent we are with traditional Christianity. Um, and if he's a reader and is actually open to exploring the idea, because oftentimes pastor men, not always, of course, but oftentimes men become pastors because they are willing to dig into this spiritual minutia that the great majority of people have no interest in. And there's a book out there called The Germanization of Christianity, where the author makes clear that Christianity changed very much by coming up through Europe in the way that it did, and that had it um, remained only in the Semitic countries, it would look a lot more like Islam than it does.
So And I appreciate, so a couple of things. First, because I saw this over in the chat room, new listeners, and we don't mention this as much as we should. This show is very audience participation, question driven. So please feel free to ask any question that you want over on the side, and our producer Nick will get that lined up for Alan and I to address. Also, you can send questions in I will answer all the questions until the end. Now, at some point, I'm going to say, okay, last question for the night. If you send them in after that, maybe they'll get answered on the next show, but we'll answer all questions. And you can send them at any time if something comes to you throughout the week at vns@runestone.org. And we'd be happy to put those, shuffle those in the line for the next broadcast. So, Tyler, the question that you ask, and keeping in mind that we are a question-driven show, when we answer these kind of questions, we answer them for the person who asked, but also for the audience in general, because every question you guys ask, there's a lot of people listening that have the same question or a very similar one. So sometimes if we get out of the exact parameters of the question, that might be why. And I also realize that you're wise enough to know that we're not going to have the perfect answer or know all the details to your situation. There's some things in life that are hard that you can make your best choices on trying to navigate, but there's not a perfect fix to all these things. One of those things being a stepdad. Being a stepdad is hard. Figuring out your role in the raising of the child is very challenging, and that's a difficult undertaking. And as I'm sure going in, and it's made even more so when the biological father and you have fundamental differences, and religion is one of those, especially if it's important enough to him that he's become a pastor. So I think some of, to follow along with some of what Alan was saying, specifically in relation to the raising of your stepdaughter, well, and I don't know the type of Christian that he is. That used to have a value. If he is a traditionally minded Christian, then there's some things to work with there. If he's one of these new rainbow flag, gay is okay Christian things, I don't know what to do with that. But if he is a traditionally minded Christian, honestly, this is good advice regardless. Don't be an edgelord. Don't define yourself by your difference. Enhance commonality that is good. When you find good things that you two share in common, embrace those. He needs to be able to respect you as a man. And I don't mean in the sense of like you need to have the handshake battle to see who's got the best grip. But he needs to see you as somebody who has values that he is okay with his daughter being around, that you are a good person, that you treat his daughter well, that you treat your wife well, that you are a respectable person. You mentioned that your wife, and I'm having a technical difficulty I'm getting with Nick on, so I can't click back on the question, but I'm assuming you guys are married. You mentioned a fear socially and religiously. That fear is tremendously lessened when you are open in the practice of your faith and when you are also a good man. If you hide who you are and all of a sudden it comes out, everybody's hackles go up on like, what's this secret other life that you're leading? That is a recipe for failure and to amplify that fear response. If you are openly Asatru, and as much as he goes on about, whatever religious observance he's doing and whatever, you talk about the AFA and you talk about, man, I was at May Day at the Hof, we were celebrating Sommermal and we were dancing around the maypole and whatever. Be proud of who you are and what you believe. Showing to another man that you are not proud of who you are and what you're doing makes us all think you're up to something. And that's not a situation you want to be in, especially when you are involved in the raising of this man's child. And with your wife, whatever fear she has, the fear is lessened and she sees you and your religious practice and sees how not scary it is, sees how nice and well-adjusted and friendly and loving and good of a man you are, and that is part of your faith. All of that goes well. So being authentically and proudly Asatru in every one of those circumstances is really important. I would also say you can't come at it tomorrow and start being pushy about it. If you have not been that way up to this point, that is a subtle thing that you do by living your values and not by demanding that these other people become engaged in it. The best thing that I think, and this is, I can't tell you that this is without peril, but it needs to be done in the long run if this is a long-term situation you want to be in. Join the AFA, do AFA stuff, bring your wife to AFA things. She doesn't have to participate any more than she wants to, but she can see what goes on and see that it's not scary. Maybe even
And
see
have
that
your daughter, and your daughter gets to play with the other AFA kids. Like, wow, look how normal these people are.
Exactly. And I think that a good way to, if you're not there yet to where she is willing to attend something with you, then show them our, like, this channel. If your wife is someone who likes to think about these things deeply, Victory Never Sleeps, I hope, is a good way at least to entertain her and show her that we're not scary, and perhaps to, teach her some things about Asatru and what it does that I think, will demystify it. We're scared so much of the unknown. This will make the unknown less spooky. But also, what I think is really cool and more digestible, maybe if they don't want to spend hours listening to our podcast, have them look at our slideshows. For every quarter, we do a slideshow of all the different events that the AFA does. And there's big events and there's small events, but they're all events with happy, are people happy at the park doing fun things? There's ladies, there's kids, and there's normal looking people. That does a lot. Again, the fear factor comes a lot in the unknowns. I assume a lot of things about this pastor that I don't know. Everybody is different. But if he has scary misconceptions about these evil pagans, seeing those things should make us less scary. If your wife is scared, she shouldn't be after that. Now, making them warm up to it or be okay with it, that's a different story, but you're ahead of the game if you can make it not scary. And I think, again, like I said, having your wife attend an event and experience the hospitality of our ladies, seeing families and children running around and playing and having fun, and realizing what exactly this looks like, not in concept, but in reality, I think that's your best bet, and I would encourage you to do that. So I've got to consult a little bit different system here. Nick, could you feed me these questions in our chat that we've got over on the side on Teams? Because my chat room here is froze up. I can't look at the comments, and I also can't look at the private chat.
That's going to be a problem because I had to restart earlier, which meant the chat for me disappeared.
It's terrible.
Look at me being the tech. Look at me being the tech master.
Lawspeaker, on your computer, do you see private chat? Click that, and
Yes.
There's the questions, sir.
Yes, I'm going to read one of these questions in the private chat because my technology skills are prevailing this evening. A happy change. And although I guess, since it's Matt and Nick, and not my girlfriend, I can gloat about this victory, which is a bad thing to do in a relationship. So we got a question. How do you view divorce? How much does that happen over there? I think the questioner is from England, maybe Ireland, and or does it happen at all? And so the there are several things, in the traditional, in the traditional Norse societies, Anglo-Saxon society, the Western civilization, Aryan peoples were among the very few who gave women the right to divorce. Um, I think divorce it's sad when it happens, especially if there are young kids involved. I think it's like in the vast majority of situations, I think it's something that could be resolved without the most drastic step. You don't end a marriage because of minor differences over stuff, especially when you have kids there. Um, but at some point, yes, there certainly can be times when it is better for all concerned for a divorce to occur. The One of the things to know in and again to frame things in context, modern divorce laws were specifically designed by feminists, and avowedly so by feminists like Gloria Steinem and others, as a means of wealth transfer from men to women. And maybe that's something you believe in. I would hope not, but but having now been divorced for 12 years, I can tell you that that funding two households is a struggle, for all concerned. And money is not everything. Money is not the primary thing, but we Americans, we Westerners fight enough about money as it is. It is a struggle to live a good life, provide a good rearing to your children, in a in an intact household, and it is orders of magnitude more difficult to do it in a divided household, in a split household, in a post divorce. So we, and I don't know that we have an AFA statement of faith on it, but there's certainly nothing non-religious about getting divorced from your spouse. I think it's important when you're coming to a marriage to make your vows in a way that is a way that you can uphold it, which is something that I passed by when we were talking before. But but I think monogamy is important in a committed relationship, and especially if you take the vow to do that. The Vikings were not as strict about that, and I think much to their detriment. But in a warrior society like that, where you're losing 10-15% of your men every time you go to war, maybe that's a different situation. I don't know. I certainly am not trying to reconstruct that past. The thing to know is that, yes, women in Germanic tribal society had the right to divorce their men, but again, it happened in a more intact way. You know, if you divorced your husband, you didn't have to get an apartment in a town where you just moved 3 years ago and don't know anybody. You could take your household stuff and move back to the next village or a couple houses over where your father and where all your family still was. So divorce is a very different animal in that sort of intact societal structure.
So the AFA, this is something important. There are plenty of things in the AFA that we have hardline 100% this, 0% that, all the way good, all the way bad. But there's much more things that we as Aryan men and women have to apply our wisdom to, and we make choices. Divorce is bad. The AFA stance is divorce is bad. Now, it may be much better than the alternative, but as a default position, divorce is suboptimal. That said, living the rest of your life miserable is worse than that. Being abused consistently is worse than that. There's a lot of things that make a divorce something worth considering. I think what Alan said specifically in terms of children, you should spend some extra thought and extra consideration on that, because it makes the rearing of children much more traumatic and much more difficult. But again, even then, if the divorce is due to, abuse or other, serious things, no, we wouldn't try to forcibly enforce a couple staying together if there was a danger involved or a significant amount of mistreatment. But also, we live in a time where divorce is very, very common. I don't want to be a hypocrite. This is my second marriage. I got a divorce from my first wife. It happens, and it happens all too often. It has become I think that it has become the majority situation in America that the majority of marriages fail. That's a very sad statement about the society that we live in. Make good choices to you avoid a lot of that if you establish these things up front. But yeah, it's very common over here. And the questioner is a gentleman in Finland. And so I don't know what Finnish divorce rates are, but they're very high in the United States. Marriage is really important. It was important to our ancestors. It was important in the Viking Age. It was important in the Germanic tribal period. The monogamy of relationships amongst the Germanic tribes was remarkable to the Romans that encountered them as kind of a standout trait. Like, wow, these people treat their marriages more seriously than we treat ours. And I think there's value in that. So yeah, the AFA stance is divorce is bad. Try to avoid being in that spot. And also, once you're committed, try to work out what the problem is instead of viewing everything as something you can easily discard. But yeah, it's certainly not forbidden in the AFA, but it is something that you should, it is a bad situation that you should try to avoid if there is a reasonable way to do that.
Right. And and of course I had no cause to know any of this stuff before I got divorced, but one of the strongest indicators of mental illness is being the child of divorced parents. Because it's hard enough for parents to go through all this stuff and navigate the complexities of a divorce, but for a child, especially a small child, it has permanent and long-lasting effects.
I am very, very fortunate, and I remarked to Mandy just a couple of days ago, when I see the horrible, torturous situations that people find themselves in with custody battles and having a spouse that either does not want you involved in your child's life or wants to raise your child entirely contrary to your values. It's a horrible situation. My parents got divorced when I was in 5th or 6th grade, thereabouts. And looking back, I really wish that wasn't the case. It's caused me to this day to have a much less close relationship to my father than I wish I would have had. And it took a lot of years away from time that I could have really used my father in my life. And that was circumstance. And I don't think I even had a bad spot. I don't think that, my parents tried to keep me from one another or there was anything that way. But stuff just kind of works out that way. It's very often not good for the child. Again, if you find yourself procreating with someone who is monstrous and abusive and bad, then that obviously changes the equation.
If you are a female in a relationship with an Asatru, and if you're feeling abuse, you let us know.
Absolutely. So here's the thing. Put this out there, and we should put this out there more often. Whoever you are, if you listen to this broadcast and you're in an abusive relationship or you're going through something in your life to where you need some counsel on, please reach out to our Gothar or reach out to me personally, and I would be very happy. We would be very happy to do our best to help you navigate your situation. And please keep that in mind, because it is something that we end up doing. And as a note, I had to refresh. That's why I'm on the other side of the screen now, but now I have access to the questions once again. So, any details on plans for the next Hof? Phrasehof is the next Hof. Plan has always been on that one to have it in either Eastern Ohio or Western Pennsylvania. That's still the plan. That's where we're looking. Inside baseball stuff, we have already been looking at properties and things. We have one that somebody is going to inquire and check into possibly as early as this next weekend, but we are well engaged in that search. There's no promise on a timetable, but that's where we're at working on it. And the generous donation we received this last week has, accelerated that timetable in a really, really beautiful way. So that's where we're at on that. Can you guys put your library of old literature on a DVD and sell it, or put it on BitTorrent? It would save bandwidth and time for downloading. I'd pay $100 for a DVD. I don't know how involved that process is. If we had somebody who wanted to do that or volunteer to do that, I'm certainly not opposed to either of those things that you mentioned. I don't know how to do it.
I'll say if they're specifically meaning like all the files and stuff that's on our Runestone library, by virtue of how I'm transitioning it from WordPress to Wix or whatever, I'm having to download all the files myself. So I will have them all downloaded. Theoretically, yeah, I could probably put them all on a disc, and we could probably sell it to somebody.
Could you make what about the BitTorrent situation?
I haven't torrented in like 10, 15 years, and I never uploaded torrents. I don't know how that works. I always downloaded them.
So the answer to you, Morris, is if we could figure that out, or if you wanted to maybe reach out to Nick on the back end with an idea, not opposed to it, but with the limited volunteers that we have now in that area, it's not something I think that we would devote a lot of resources towards. But if it's a relatively simple process, I wouldn't be opposed to the torrent situation or something similar. So, Alan, what do you think of people like Jordan Peterson?
Well, I think Jordan Peterson has a lot of valid things to say about the nature of relationships and about the nature of the underlying psychological structure. I think he's been a very strong advocate of the genetic distinction between men and women. I don't think he's right about everything, but I admire the strength that he has shown for for defending his traditional viewpoint about things. Um, and I think he's made a lot of friends. And he's one of those guys who kind of lives in our quadrant. I think um, we would disagree about some things, but I think by and large, as an advocate, as an outspoken and eloquent advocate of traditional viewpoints, I think he's moving the ball in the right direction. I disagree with him about some things, obviously, but I read his book, um, and I got a lot out of it. Now, again, disagreement, sure, but by and large, he's on the team, I think.
Yeah, I like Jordan Peterson. Clearly, and this is the important thing. We do this a lot, and I see a lot of infighting a lot of the time when people that agree with us 70%, we want to be mad about the 30% instead of excited about the 70. And we take that to in the circles that many of us run in, and I'm not exaggerating, there's a lot of us that are 97% on the same team, yet we want to be really mad at the 3% and not the 97% commonality. And I don't think that does us any favors. In the greater cultural milieu that we find ourselves in, Jordan Peterson is much closer to being on our team than being on, the enemy's team. And I think that there's a lot of wisdom there. Certainly, I don't agree with all of his conclusions. I believe he's a Catholic. I don't, obviously support Christianity, but traditional relationships and traditionalism in general is a much better thing than progressivism or, the chaos that those forces have come to embody. And the middle has really dropped out to where everybody's been pushed to one of the ends of that. There's not a lot of middle anymore. There's sane people wanting healthy things for society, and there is deeply mentally ill people wanting very bad things for society. And I think Jordan Peterson falls on the sane end of that.
Agreed.
Also from Finwraith, what do you think is the correct way to deal with things like porn addiction? Alan, do you have thoughts?
Just say no.
So I'm going to push on that. As opposed to someone looking to pick up a porn addiction habit, just say no, I think is a good advice. But if we have people who find themselves in the midst of that, what would you recommend?
I don't know. Outside my skill set, when I will tell you that I have addictive characteristics of this addictive genealogy in my family. And in the way back when I was a younger lad and experimenting with chemical enhancement, I dabbled with addiction there. There are strategies. I assume that there are strategies out there on the internet. YouTube tells me everything else I need to know. So I'm sure I'm sure that, read the Havamal and think pure thoughts. And stop putting yourself in the situation where that becomes the thing.
So
stay in the living room and stop going out in the bathroom.
So
I apologize for being flippant.
You're fine, because my next comment is I don't know a better way to put it, but it has an interesting extra meaning in this context. Idle hands are the devil's workshop. So that said, and I really do mean this though. There's some things with addiction. Sometimes addiction, be it chemical or be it psychological, and I suppose some of those things are chemical too, with dopamine and other things. So a lot of times it's self-medicating. Other times it is a hyper focus or an obsessing about something. I think both of those things are very often made better by touching grass, as the kids say. If you're by yourself and alone, you are more likely to engage in negative behavior than if you are out living and enjoying life with other people and other community. We substitute a lot of the mental security and mental health that we get from our friends and our family and our community with, it's okay. And it all goes back to this. So we've got a common theme. I often describe things that are like that as masturbatory because they are. We have things that we do to like make ourselves feel better about ourselves or waste time or whatever we're doing instead of sitting around with the uncomfortable awkwardness of having empty lives. Do stuff. Go out and fill that void with community, with productivity. And I don't just mean fiscal productivity. Sure, if you can put that into being an entrepreneur or doing something great that way and you're passionate about it, okay. But spend that time going out there and talking to girls. If it has a lustful element to it, then spend that time out there engaging in real world situations with the opposite sex. If it's just a need to feel wanted or good or whatever the deal is, go out and make some friends, go out and do stuff. And again, I'm not trying to be pearl clutchy on it or whatever, but the question was asked with the addiction. And the addiction implies more than a casual consumption. It implies a being compelled to, feeling like you're beyond your power to make decisions not to. And you don't want to be in a spot where you can't choose. One of the most fundamental things to our philosophy and our worldview is that as Aryan people, and Aryan means noble. It's a word that means nobility, not in the sense that we're better than everybody else, though that, not in the sense that it's some kind of an inherent thing, but it's something that we owe it to ourselves to be and embody. It is a defining characteristic of our people, of our ancestors, and something we ought to live up to. The nobility in that, one of those standards that you live up to as a noble person is making choices and dealing with consequences of choices you make. You're not at the whims of your addictions or other people. You choose how to live your life. And if you are not able to choose whether to consume something or not consume something, that's a situation you want to remedy. I think filling your downtime, time that you would normally be preyed upon by intrusive thoughts or by urges or by, whatever's going on that's causing you to engage in an addictive activity, filling that time with something meaningful in the real world that is beneficial, I think that's always a good option. The less downtime you have, the less opportunity you have to revel in your addiction. And I think that's, something I'd certainly advise everybody to do. Again, like Alan said too, in the world we live in, that's a thing. It's a thing a lot of young men have talked about that they're dealing with. Something that surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, but our Gothar counsel people on from time to time. And, this is a strategy that I've seen be helpful to folks in that situation. For what it's worth. So from Tyler, it's hard to discern if Christianity is on the rise, specifically in America. What are the potential repercussions for pagans in a resurgent Christian West? Allen.
Well, again, I think what we traditionalist pagans want to try to do is to make sure that we build inroads with traditionalist Christians and emphasize the compatibility that we have I think to the extent that Christianity is resurgent, it is resurgent specifically among the hardline traditionalist faiths. I haven't looked at the numbers in a long time, but I think that, a lot of the analysis that was going on in 20 15, 20, 30 years ago was that as the church got softer on its moral stance, that's why people drifted away from the church, because if there's no difference between being a Christian and not being a Christian, then why go? Why be? Why espouse something that, first of all, most modern Christianity is quite deviant from traditional practice of Christianity, and I think it uses Christianity as an excuse to deviate from Western civilization, which is more important than Christianity. So I think the way to do it is to, emphasize our compatibility. I can tell you that I didn't go to Charlottesville, but I was in Pikesville before that, and there were lots and lots of Christians there, and we got along very well. A lot of them used the Viking symbology in the way that they defend their faith. So we can get along.
I would much rather have that problem than the opposite. I'd like to, first suggest there isn't the idea that there's that paganism is a thing. It's not. Christianity is a thing. There may be a number of sects of Christianity, but as a general concept, there is a commonality that unites them. There isn't that under paganism. So much of what people call paganism is license for degeneracy and a insincere and childish blue-haired daddy issues, fatty cult thing. That's not what we're doing. I don't see Christianity on the rise in America. I don't see that at all. It is much less Christian than it was when I was growing up. So I think the question is highly speculative, because there's no scenario that I see some kind of theocratic takeover of the United States.
I think it is true. I think it is true that people are casting about for spiritual meaning, and some of that, they can explore the shallow pool of Christianity, or they can come home to their own faith. Hopefully, more of the latter as we reach out with our next Hoth.
And there's things that ebb and flow. So yes, there's people that are growing very dissatisfied with the lack of meaning in the world that the modern West has created. And some of those people do want to find religion, we have a really big rise of people that lean hard into the degeneracy, and I don't see that that's stopping. When we have people that want to come to religiosity, I don't think we see the surge in the everybody's welcome, we don't really stand for anything Christianity that characterizes a lot of modern Christianity. I see a surge in more traditional sects of Christianity, but I don't often see people in our circles necessarily stay there. We do see a lot of people that were raised in Christian environments that no longer hold to any of the core values that used to define those environments. We see those people open up to coming home to Asatru, and we've had a lot of those people join. So I think it's good if people want to return to traditionalism and traditional religion. I think that will help us grow and won't hurt us. I think the distance between the greater American theocratic empire is so vast that between there, everything that would move towards that would also build the AFA and swell our numbers. And I think as that happens, we would find points of commonality. And it's hard to game what an end result of that is, but there's certainly nothing like that anywhere close to, in our foreseeable future. In the meantime, like I said about Jordan Peterson, we can celebrate the, people coming home to sanity. That builds the AFA's numbers. I don't think that Christianity has the stranglehold on morality anymore that it had at one point. And so I think that more people wanting to live traditional and moral lives is a good thing. And I don't like to categorize us in any way with paganism, because that word doesn't have a meaning that is valid other than it means not Christian. Here's a question. Do you have class type studies, or do you just want everybody to read all this on their own? I'm a know-nothing kind of guy who feels pulled to more ancestral
faith and practice. Listen,
yeah, the question cuts off, but sure, I think we get the point on that. So sort of. Myself and Witten Svan Harold go through the lore on this program twice a month, pretty extensively. And we try
that's
to
not beginner lore though that you guys are doing.
Well, it's not, but it is accessible because we break down the points into digestible things and we answer the questions. So I think one of the most important things is right now, yes, read the core material. That's cool. You don't have to read thousands of pages of lore to participate in the gift cycle with our gods and to come home to Asatru. It's not a study project. That's not how religion is. Join the AFA, show up to local events, learn as you do, learn as you go, and ask questions. If you don't know enough to where that you've decided this is something you want to do, please feel free to ask any of us questions. That's why I and was encouraging you to look into the Victory Never Sleeps on the lore studies, because so much of the show is answering questions. Doesn't matter how well read or not one is. If you have a question, just ask, and we're really happy to jump in and talk you through it. In a traditional society, every person wasn't, a lore expert. You go and you participate and you pick things up through the culture over time and through talking to the people that do it, talking to your elders, talking to the priests, and learning as you go. Now, as opposed to some previous structures in the past, we don't want to put any hurdle between you and the lore. By all means, please go read it. But we're very happy to get this going in a very organic way for new people. One thing that I would encourage you to read, if you'd like, though, that does kind of encapsulate exactly what the AFA believes, is the Asatru True Logmal. It's basically our statement of belief. You can find it at runestone.org. The purpose of that was to simplify what is fundamental to AFA Asatru practice as a place to start from. But again, any questions that you might have, you can email me personally, mattflavel@runestone.org. I'd be happy to answer anything to the best of my ability. Any of our Gothar would be happy to answer your questions and have a conversation with you and help you work through anything you might be struggling on. As far as structured classes, sometimes we have some of that at our Hofs. A number of local groups that get together will have lore study as part of their moot. We're certainly open to that in the future, but I don't think we have really like a curriculum to put one through at this point. But yeah, please ask anything you want and check this out in the real world. You learn this by practice, not by study. Study helps, but practice is what's essential.
We should. Let's work on that. Let's put together an AFA 101.
Are you volunteering?
Yep.
All right. Well, then we will talk about doing that. I know that's something a lot of people will want. We have tried those in the past, and the participation didn't really flesh out, but I think it's time we try again. Okay, this one's for you, Alan. Why the two-headed eagle? Is that for Germany?
I think it has a common origin. This behind me is my own personal banner that I had pieced together these many years ago. And I don't. If Richard was here, I would try to talk him through some of the symbology on it. The two-headed eagle represents a lot of the symbology that Janus had in the Roman world. The two-headed eagle is represents the division and erstwhile mastery over both the physical and the physical and the ethereal realm.
Is that a stuffed pig that is gripping it at the top?
Okay. Well, and see again. Wow, I didn't think you could see that well.
Yeah, it's on the other side.
It's a stuffed pig, and the other side, yeah, there's the pig and there's the bee. So a long time ago, I went to the a mead hall moot that they had in, I think it was in Mississippi. Maybe it was in Arkansas, but I think it was in Mississippi. And my mead, the B represents the judge's mead, and my mead won that competition, the judge's mead, and the pig represents the way the AA does their mead judging competition is they have like the judges who sit and sip and take a long time distinguishing the characteristics of a mead, and then they pass the mead down to what they call the mead hogs, which is the less civilized participants at the far end of the table. And my mead won both competitions, so that's why I proudly keep the pig and the bee on my banner.
Learn something every day. Alan makes a good mead. This is well known and established. Alan makes a good mead.
I appreciate it.
Pretty much the primary ritual mead we use anytime he's traveling anywhere.
Alan is also generous with the mead that he makes.
Well, that's the only reason you guys let me go to stuff.
I mean, yeah, kind of, sort of. All right. So our next deal here. All right. From Rando User. I'm in an abusive relationship. I live in supposedly the greatest country on earth that totally hates me. Can I get some help here? Alan, would you like to respond to that?
The answer is yes. We will help you. You need to email our Gothar, particularly the Githyas, but we will reach out to you and try to help you. Um, if you are in an abusive relationship, we will try to figure out how to get you out of that. I mean, that's I sympathize, I empathize with your situation. I dated a girl who was in an abusive relationship before I dated her. I've seen the outcome of that sort of stuff. It's horrible. It's bad. The other people don't hate you. That's what that guy has told you. He is a liar. He is using that to control you. Don't believe it. We will help you.
So, there's a couple of ways to take the question, and not knowing anything or even the gender of the person that expressed it. First, 100%, like if you are legitimately in a romantic relationship that is abusive, we would be very glad to help you. Please reach out to any one of us. I'm going to go with a different option on this because I don't think that's how this question was intended. But everyone who is listening, if that is your situation, contact the Gothar, contact them right now, and we would be very, very happy to talk to you and help you navigate your way to a place where you are safe and you are healthy and where you're on the road to having a good, healthy, positive life. We would love to help with that in any way that we could. If the meaning of this is the relationship you're in that is abusive is with your country that doesn't like you, we can help with that too. I think a lot of people feel, a lot of young, straight, white males in this country feel very mistreated by our country. And I think there's ways to where people are mad about it, ironically, and ways to where it is literally driving many young men to suicide. If you are looking for sense in the world and you feel like the country's turned against you and you're unwanted and any of those things, chances are you're wanted here in the Asatru Folk Assembly. You should give it a try. We would love to help you find worth and meaning in a community that doesn't hate you and that wants you to be successful. That's what we're building here. We get a lot of different people that listen to the program that, have different levels of understanding of what we do. In the AFA, and I mean, there's different levels to what we do and how much you want to participate in it. In the AFA, though, Alan mentions the Kali Yuga earlier, or the Wolf Age. Yeah, there's a lot of bad things going on in the world. But in the AFA, we're building a golden age within the husk of the crumbling world around us. If we can help make the bigger world a better place, by all means, we want to be part of that. But in the meantime, what we can do is we have the ability to affect our folk in the Asatru Folk Assembly in a significant and meaningful way. One of the most beautiful things to me is when we receive emails and responses and people that tell us that the AFA has literally saved their life, that the AFA has, brought meaning to their life, and that they felt like they came home when they joined the AFA. Can't promise you that that's what you'll feel, but I hope it is, and I'd like you to give it a chance to, if you'd consider, reaching out, learning about us, and if you're interested, joining us and being part of what we're doing, because there's a lot of love and a lot of beautiful things here that we would encourage all of our folk to be a part of. Would someone be welcome to attend an event without committing to the worship aspects until they see what they entail? Absolutely. Absolutely. We're not, anyone listening, we're not silly. I don't believe that it's a reasonable ask for you to be able to sincerely devote yourself to the worship and loyalty to divinity without getting to know that divinity, without getting to know what that worship looks like. Nobody asks you to accept things sight unseen in the AFA. Check it out. Come to an event. See what's going on. See how we do things. Oh, what I do ask is if you do come to something, that you come with an open heart, with an open mind, and that you allow yourself to be open to developing those things.
And for most of our HOFs, we're going to ask you to allow yourself to be vetted a little bit. We just give us a call and talk to one of the Gothar so that we know who you are when you get there. And,
don't be a party
love new people. Yes.
But that's the thing. If you look on our calendar of events, and I'd encourage everybody to go do that. So this is a cool thing, and it's something I'm proud of and makes me happy. So go do this thing. Look at our calendar on runestone.org. We have a calendar of events. And to make it easy to navigate, we color coordinate to the different HOF districts, and we have the little 2-letter what state you're in or what country you're in on where those events are. And I think that there may very well be something near most of you guys who are in this chat room. See what's going on. Every one of those events has a contact person who's hosting it. Reach out. Yeah, we may ask you, what's your name, so we can make sure that you're not a sex offender and scary to our children. But that's the big requirement. And then we'd like to have you come out and see what we're doing. Yeah, it's really special. We've spent a lot of time making it. I think it's really cool, but it's also a testament to our folk builders that work really hard to host these local events.
And we all had a first time that although mine was 20 years ago, literally, but there was for each and all of us, there was a first time when we had never been to an AFA, we had never been to an Asatru event. We had never met another Asatruer or heathen or Odinist. And we go in and we take that risk, and we go in and say, what's going on in there? And then it's all cool.
Yeah, that's a thing. Every place that you see that we have a HOF or that we have a successful community of AFA members started with one person, just like the rest of us, who said, hey, I wish there was something near me. How come there's not? Well, because we don't have anybody there to host it. Well, what do you need to do to host it? Well, cool. Let's set you up and you can host stuff. That's how everything got started. Sometimes it, takes a long time to develop. Sometimes it develops quickly. So a lot of the time it's somewhere in between. But they're, oftentimes very normal men and women who are committed to wanting to make this work and wanting to make something happen. They gather folk around them, and then a community happens. Every one of us started somewhere. Every one of us didn't know about this, didn't know what it was going to be like, and had to feel it out. A lot of us had really humble starts. I've told the story before, but I remember the first event I went to. I'm like, who are these, oddball people? What's going on here? This is crazy. It was in a park, but it was surrounded by these woods. And I was creeping around in the woods, peeking around trees, kind of seeing what was going on and who these people were. We all go through that, just wondering. And the only way to know and to defeat the concern of the unknown is show up and see. Maybe you're going to love it. I mean, I suppose there's a chance you won't, but I think there's a really good chance that you might. So I would encourage you to reach out to anybody who hosts any of those things or any of our other AFA contacts, and we can get you set up and all figured out. But no, we don't expect for you to sign up and be 100% committed to the worship of our gods without ever experiencing anything or ever knowing anything about it. We would never ask that of you. It's not fair. What does the black sun mean to you? Alan, I think it's referring again to your banner.
I will be glad to have a conversation with you on a personal level about what that means, and even about all the rest of the stuff. That's some of the, but now we're getting into the more esoteric side of it that I don't usually talk about on the interwebs, because you know how I am about that stuff.
So I'll throw this out there too. AFA, we use the black sun imagery, or what's come to be known as the black sun imagery, for a number of things. You may notice we use that as a halo around divinity and around our ascended heroes, in red, and in gold around gods. And it's a solar symbol of power, of light, of nobility, of brightness, of noble brightness lighting up darkness and lighting up the world around it, of power emanating from the central point or from the sacred center or from the divinity or ascended person of greatness. It's a very ancient symbol. It's something you see a lot of varieties of representations of back in the migration period in the Germanic tribes. It develops in a lot of different ways. The one we most commonly use is the 12 spoke, because that, is a very solar, that is the full-on solar imagery of it, with the months and the rotational pattern of it. But it's a very powerful symbol to our folk. It always has been. But I think a lot of people have different personal associations with it. And again, if you reach out to Alan on the side, he'll have a deep conversation with you about it. Is there any, okay, so this is from Morris again. Is there any interest in training on AI on all your old literature and making a virtual Gothy? AI often gives silly answers. So that is a nuanced question. No, the idea of a virtual Gothy is offensive on the face of it, but having a AI curated storehouse of collected written works and collected wisdom, so that that could be accessed efficiently, I think that's a nice idea, and I think that's probably something certainly for the future. But creating an AI Gothy is offensive to those of us that are Gothar, and I don't think you necessarily meant it that way. I'm just putting it out there as a concept. There's a lot more that goes into not just knowing the lore or knowing the written material, but having the wisdom to apply it and to piece it together in the way that's beneficial, because this is very much an art as opposed to a science. And AI is increasingly good at science, but it's not good at art. And there is an art to how to weave together all the pieces of collected lore and collected wisdom of our folk in a way that's beneficial, that I don't think can be done without the directing hand of an individual with will and connection to the divine. Do you have thoughts on it, Alan?
I'm opposed to it squared, whatever your stance opposing it is. I don't, how I'm about technology. I think it separates us from the divine. So, now at the same time, I I certainly would have, like I could see an AI introductory, explanatory, have like the Saxon warrior, take you from the migration period up to the conversion or something like that, but just as a historical and basic introduction to the practice, not Gothi. And if that's what he means, which I think that's probably what we're talking about, I would think that that would be tolerable.
I think an AI librarian makes a lot of sense. I
There you
think
go.
beyond that is not the case. But the next question, can I bring my homie Jamal to an event? So my initial response is going to be no. The strange thing that's unfortunate, and I realize the question as it's phrased is obviously silly, but because I see applications that come through, there's a surprising amount of children and young people coming up in the world today whose parents have made really unfortunate choices with their naming. There's a lot of
Yes.
people named after.
And so we both made an assumption about Jamal.
If your homie Jamal is not a Caucasian person, then no, he's not welcome to come to our events. We're an ethnic faith. If he is ill-named, like some little white girls I've known who were named Kenya, trying to think, there's a number of examples of people that have been given ethnically leading names that are not indicative of their genetic ethnicities. Yeah, that's unfortunate. But no, if your homie Jamal is appropriately named, they have plenty of their own events they can go to that are not Asatru events. What are the AFA beliefs regarding Deus Pater? I'm curious.
Go ahead.
All right. So this is a question of directionality. When I answer some of these questions, much like the Jamal question, I assume things going into it. And if it misrepresents where you're coming from with the question, I apologize. I understand there is a concept of Sky Father in Aryan European, pantheons. I find myself, when this comes up, having a discrepancy with the directionality of it. When we assume roles of divinity through scholastic study of commonalities, there must be a Sky Father and an Earth Mother and a Striker, and this is this Dumazillion function and this other thing, we miss the point. Our gods are not beholden to anthropological, sociological constructs of how scholars have decided to partition divinity. Our gods exist and are the gods of our folk. All of those other things are us as people trying our best, in the best of circumstance, to better understand divinity, and not an external thing divinity is focused on. In the Norse pantheon of, nomenclature of our gods, who fills the role of Sky Father, I don't think it works that way. I don't think that any of the pantheons of our folk are quite that simple. We have a number of gods that function in what would traditionally be defined as that role. But again, they're under no obligation to meet theories of where the gods fit. As far as our gods with sky functions, I think you can find Deus Pater associations with Thor, with Tyr, and with Odin. I think you find a lot more nuance in that, because I think sometimes the god represents or is manifested in the rage of storms, sometimes in the mystery of the night sky, sometimes in the brilliance of the day sky. And I think it is much more complex than the theory that produces that means. If we're talking about authority as, as ruler of the gods, the Allfather Odin is the king of our gods and the ruler of the Aesir. But again, it has to go with the exact function you want under that, because there's a number of associations with Deus Pater that look different depending on what context you want to put that in.
Yeah, and it's too, and I think as that standalone concept, it's too limiting for, I wish Asatru were that simple, that it was this and not that, but it's complicated.
Well, it is, and there's a reductionism in scholastic circles because it makes it easier and it makes it more linear and easier to follow. And if you're building it from the ground up, that makes a lot of sense. If you are trying to build it from Asgard down, it is much harder, because you're trying to reach up to something beyond your understanding and get your best avenues of wisdom towards it, knowing that you won't ever have perfection, certainly this side of the veil of understanding the entire depth and breadth of it. But yeah, there's a lot to it, certainly. And there's a tendency to reduce everything to Skyfather and Earth Mother. And then the Wiccans reduce that further to Skyfather having to come from Earth Mother, so it's all really the primal goddess. We always reduce things down to where it ends up becoming a monotheism, and it's much more complex than that. And each of our gods are real and exist as personality with agency. And to reduce that, or to not appreciate that in its full scope, we can't nearly as effectively engage in the gift cycle with each of those gods. Aside from the gods, what does Asatru think about the pantheon of other creatures like giants, trolls, etc.? Alan, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that the rest of the subtle realm exists. Freyr is the god of the Alfar, among other things, and I think that as your practice becomes more complex and more nuanced, you can commune, and I don't mean in any kind of direct way, but I think you can associate with those beings. We certainly give offerings to the land wipes, um, you know, the house trolls, those sorts of beings can clear a path for you, or they can impede your progress. They're they're in that same nuance plane with the other ethereal beings, but I believe in their existence, if that's the question.
So we run into a fallacy of language to where when we talk about all those different things, the terms used in the lore have a lot of overlap. Alfar means spirit, or, I'm trying to think of the closest cognate, but it means elf in the sense of what you think when you think of an elf, but it also means ascended ancestor. It also means a spirit that occupies a place. There's a lot of subtle distinction between versions of those things. There are light Alfar and Svart Alfar and dark Alfar. There are all these different little things, and I think that you could drive yourself insane trying to find the nuance of all of it. There are many things that exist beyond our perception or our normal perception that affect the world that we live in the cosmos and the metaphysics of things beyond the veil. We attach names to those things oftentimes by what they do in our, limited way to know them. The simple answer and the fundamental is yes, those things exist and we understand that they exist. As far as how to deal with them, Jotnar and trolls are typically, again, we've talked about it on the show. When we talk about giants or Jotnar, there are really different distinctions there. There are very ancient, primal things that exist without consciousness that just kind of go into chaotic primal nature. There are vastly wise ancient forces that are storehouses of wisdom and magic and whatever else. And then there are churlish, things with clubs. And figuring out what that is a complex thing in our lore on what they're being used for. But the bigger truth of that with trolls and Jotnar is there are negative and malevolent forces of chaos that exist in the spiritual realm that wish us harm. We do well to take note of those and be cautious of that kind of association. There are other things in a positive sense in the spiritual realm that we take note of, and we want to have a beneficial relationship. We often refer to these as whites, spelled differently, but basically meaning spirits. There are spirits of the land, there are spirits of the house. There are spiritual forces that occupy the world around us, and wanting to maintain good relationships with the environment we are in and acknowledge spiritual entities when we're able to perceive them is a positive thing. We can go into a lot of depths about, how that manifests or whatever else. But yes, we believe those things exist on the spiritual plane as, chaotic, malevolent entities, as, unconscious forces of degeneration, as conscious, ascended ancestors, as other spirits of place and of the natural world. Those things exist, and parsing them out is a very complex thing that requires really specific questions. How do you know when you're ready to be engaged? And the follow-up, to be married? Alan, how do you know when you're ready to get engaged and be married?
It's like a lot, you just know. I mean, and I think actually one of the troubling things that we all sort of face is, you never know when you're ready. And so if you overanalyze that question, you're never going to be as ready as you might think that you should be in some hypothetical ideal universe. But you're you just at some point, you make your preparation, you take the leap. The so and so there's no easy answer to that question. I think if you know somebody pretty well and they jibe up with your all your belief system like we've talked about, then you're ready.
This is the trouble with a lot of these questions. I know as an audience, you'd be much more satisfied if we had very, very clear answers on everything. I don't think that's how it works on a lot of things. There are competing tendencies. There's the just fall madly in love and get married in the first week you meet somebody. And there's wait endlessly for perfect and find out perfect never comes. And you've been, in a live-in relationship with somebody for 30 years and you never actually get married. It will never be the perfect time to get engaged or get married. You will never be perfectly satisfied or perfectly able to trust every outcome, and to plan towards that is unrealistic. You have in your mind a core threshold of trust, of consistency, of have you guys spoken about the things that are meaningful in your lives, about your future, about children, about religion, about all the things that matter? Have you guys talked about that? And are you close enough in agreement that you're okay with where those discussions have led you? I would advise, don't rush in to things quickly. I think that giving things a long enough time to where you have to, deal with imperfect situations and struggles in your life first a little bit is very meaningful, because we often show very different sides of ourselves when we're pressure tested. That said, I don't advise that you cynically arrange to pressure test a potential spouse.
Why? Not cynically, but I mean, you could uncynically.
I think that if you create situations that you manufacture to test them, I think it builds in a baked in resentment or an anger, and it can easily go bad. If you find so what is an uncynical test is like, have them around your friends and see how they interact. Get them around the people that you do stuff with and see if they can, deal with those things. Be open and honest with them about who you are and what you like and what you do, and see if they feel the same way about, every day sitting around in your pajamas in your, recliner you, as they do on the you that puts on their best foot forward on a date. I think that those things all really matter. I think that coming up with contrived stuff to set them up in strange things is going to build a distrust if it's not done very carefully. But yeah, have wisdom in the choice that you make. And what I would advise is that you wait until the initial lust of a brand new relationship tempers a little bit. How long should you wait? I don't know. Getting married the first week is too soon. Getting married the first month is too soon. There's some things that I could tell you are out of bounds, but what that exact time frame is for you, what I would say is, don't wait based on trying to wait for perfect. Perfect will not happen. Man, but if I wait, then I'll have enough money to buy a ring. Man, I don't know if I could really marry right now. I don't have a good enough job. How could I support a family? All of those kind of things, I don't think that should prevent you. None of us know how long we have this side of the veil. There will never be the perfect time, and there will always be a case to be made. Maybe I should wait a little bit longer until I have this next thing. And you can wait yourself right out of having a productive and meaningful life. So don't do that. But do give it some time to let the realities sink in and to make a choice based on your feelings, certainly, but also tempered by sober reasoning. And I appreciate the question. I think it's a good question. What about living together before marriage? Alan, what are your thoughts?
Works for me.
Yeah. So here's one of the other realities. You can't just cherry pick one aspect of a bygone cultural context and superimpose it in total upon the world that we live in. I think in a different society where that was not customary, and there's a lot of things that can work in the right context. In today's context, I would encourage people to live together before they're married. I certainly did. I think most people that I know have done that and gone that route. I think it's very tempting to suggest some kind of conservative level of chaste, and I'm not even faulting this, but going back to an earlier 20th century conception of propriety on that, but I don't think we have the social structure that supports that in the same way. So yeah, I mean, I certainly lived with my wife before we got married. I think that's probably a good thing. The things I've seen over in the chat about you get to kind of see people when they're raw, see people in their natural habitat when they're not trying to impress, be around them when they're sick and they're, when they're not in an ideal environment that's been constructed, when they're there's this feminist, oh no, you didn't, if you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best. Well, you should make an effort to not be at your worst. But there is something to be said of knowing, where somebody's at and how they are when times are rough, and also knowing how they are when times are good. Those things matter. So I think you get a particular view of that when you do live together for an amount of time. What does Asatru consider is wrong with people that are just demons? Some of our politicians seem purely evil, some regular people too. It's a good question. Alan, what are your thoughts on
that? In the long time ago, in a moot far away, I had a discussion with a good friend of mine, and we talked about that topic. First of all, I think it does go back to the idea of the evil influences that that in the exact same way that there are good spiritual influences, there are positive spiritual energies out there, there are negative spiritual energies, and I think they can infect people in a subtle way. I think for the most part, though, it seems to me that people that we think of as evil are really just people who make bad decisions. They're not infected with a demon, they're just assholes. And I realize it can go beyond that. And I certainly, I've had on, I wish I could remember the name of the guy who made the glasses. I've been on this trend about They Live, Roddy Piper movie where you have the sunglasses and you can see the demons that live in people. And I certainly think that there are some few actual demons out there that are skinwalkers, that's certainly supported by the lore. I think other types of soul sickness result from some sort of incomplete ensoulment, where the soul, for whatever reason, or maybe not all of the soul complex, we are 9 parts, all of the soul complex does not attach completely and elegantly um, to the new life. And so I think that, first of all, that accounts for uh, some sorts of disabilities. I think it also would leave a door open for some sort of actual evil entity to enter in and maintain, or at least, you know, have more influence over that person than they would over some different person. What I have come to understand is that those sorts of things are so subtle and complex. It's just really, we can only understand that realm in a very minimal way. I think there are evil influences. I think those who are not properly psychically prepared can fall prey to all sorts of demons. The demon of um, the worship of money and many others. And so yes, those evil influences are out there, and that's one of the reasons that you need a good, strong cadre of good people around you to fend that sort of thing off.
So, what Alan said, certainly all of those things. There are bad spiritual entities out there that can influence people in bad ways. And in the worst case scenario, perhaps manifest or take over somebody, or they're somehow troll possessed. But I think that's an easy out. And I think that's highly overused. I think the devil made me do it is highly, highly overused. There are a lot of people that are just bad people. And one of the things that you see with bad people, and you use the politicians as an example, something happens where we have a tremendous ability to justify our actions. There is a psychological function in people that very few people think they're doing anything, very few people rationalize that they are doing evil things. Now, there are certain people that are sociopaths, that are overtly sadistic. You see, people that torture children or torture animals or serial killers. There's people that are just genuinely evil out the gate. They're evil on purpose. They're evil because either they are the subject of some kind of horrible spiritual possession, or they're just very damaged and broken soul component people. But there's a lot of other people that do bad things and justify them a lot. And I'm going on your thing asking about politicians and other people that just seem evil. Every time you do stuff that you know is wrong and you have to do little mental gymnastics to justify it and make it okay, you make it a little bit harder at the next junction to say, hey, this is bad. I shouldn't do this. If you're living wrong for a year, you have to, in order to correct yourself, acknowledge, like, man, I've spent this last year being a really bad person. I've hurt a lot of people. I should fix that and get right. That's hard to do. It's very hard for us to admit that to ourselves. There's something called the sunk cost fallacy. Once you've invested a certain number of years into things in your life, you have an option at some point of whether you lean into realizing that you're living wrong and try to correct yourself, or you double down, you let it ride. Like, no, I'm not living wrong. This is the way I'm supposed to live. And you keep going. And it's easier to avoid the psychological trauma of reconciling the damage that you've caused and the wrong that you've done by continuing to lean into the delusion that there's nothing wrong with what you're doing and to keep living wrong. You mentioned politicians. In the way that our system works currently, and perhaps in political situations historically, if you are one of the political figures that endlessly compromises core value for personal gain or for maintaining your position or whatever you do, there comes a point where you, and this may seem like a really convoluted answer to your question. This is something that I see with age. And a lot of the politicians, you find these 90-year-old, 80-something-year-old individuals that have been senators for the last 60 years. They've never known a life where they weren't in that spot. The more you're into that, the more you make whatever compromises you need to do to stay in that spot, and the more you invest personally into justifying that. Can you imagine if you spent 90 years, or, if you spent 80 years of your life wrong and living poorly, and then you have to come to the realization of, man, I am a terrible person. I should fix this, with that much of the time already through the hourglass. That's really traumatic. In a less evil-oriented way, we see that a lot with older people, as far as, we see that, okay, in recent times, a great many people have become disabused of being able to trust their government, to trust their media, to trust a lot of things that were traditionally trusted. And I face some of this in my own life with my father and my stepmother and people of that generation, where they've been part of a system that's been lying to us for a really, really, really long time. And the blow of like, wow, I've been hoodwinked for, my entire adult life. I should radically rethink my value system and my, all of these core values. That's a crushing blow that a lot of people don't know how to survive and don't know how to manage. So they double down and they choose not to see things that are obvious because the other is just unacceptable. If you're somebody who has just sold your soul to be in your political spot for all of these years, and at some point you're like, man, maybe I'm living wrong. I mean, that's more than a lot of people can take. I would say that's more than most people can take. So you lean into the bad behavior and you placate yourself with, sensory benefits or just mental justifications or whatever you can do. But facing the reality of needing to fundamentally change the lifestyle you've chosen to lead is increasingly harder the longer that you're in a bad lifestyle. And I think that's what we see. I think we see people that have habituated decades of their life to misbehavior and immorality, and they simply don't have the strength of character to fix themselves, so they double down on poor choices and on villainy. I think there's probably a lot of other explanations, but that's the one that I see. Could you share with us your informative perspective on the Germanic existential origin story? I know there's Muspel, Niflheim, Ymir, and Adomla, but I feel I'm missing something. There must be more. I'm trying to read whether... Okay, I think it's separate. Okay, he has another question, but I think it's a completely separate question. Alan, how would you approach that?
Well, this is something I actually emailed one of the non-AFA authors about, and corresponded with her a bit on, on that idea. First, I think it's important, it seems to me, that it's the way I understand it, and I wouldn't say this is AFA dogma, but the way I understand it is that the story of Emir, because it goes back to beyond the origin, it's one of those things that's like what happened before the Big Bang. And so it's just a way of trying to understand why there is something rather than nothing. The story of Emir, mainly because it the struggle that I had with it is what the story portrays is that Wotanaz is not the original being. Um, but what that but so at the same time, then the way that it, to me, co-opts the story is that there was this primordial somethingness, and Wotan shaped it in a way that gave life and being to the folk. And so that's how it all comes together for me. Like, was there a literal giant who was killed by his children and, after being lapped into existence by the primordial cow? Maybe. But I don't think that, I wouldn't treat that as a totem of faith. That's a way to understand it. I think the more important part is to see the part where the forces of order come in to shape this plasma, if that's the word that you want to use, into something that we the folk can live and enjoy.
So there's something to be said when examining our lore generally, is what is the purpose of it? And I think that the scientific development of the earth is much, much less important to our ancestors, as is setting the spiritual stage for the reality that we exist in, and then positioning and orienting ourselves within that stage that we find ourselves in, within that, understanding of our surroundings. So providing us with a setting and with a fundamental impetus of who we are and where we come from. And I think that's spoken to by our lore in a very profound way. In the beginning, you see an undifferentiated, yawning void that's pregnant with potentiality. You see these very primal, cosmic, existing things that are fundamentally chaotic. You see Emir as the primal giant of chaos, but you see with the emergence of Odin, and importantly, his brothers, Vili and Ve. So you see the god of, ecstatic inspiration coupled with literally will and sacrality, destroying the primal chaotic giant, taking chaos, breaking it down, and shaping our ordered existence from that chaos. You see them build the world, build the more importantly, build the world that we exist within from the elements of this chaotic primordial giants. They are ordering chaos through inspiration, through will, and through sacrality. And then you have those same three gods find two pre-existing things on a seashore. They're described as, pieces of driftwood. And from these things that were adrift, that didn't have fate, that didn't have personhood, that didn't have that divine spark, that didn't have the life force that makes humans a whole separate order of things than other creatures we find around ourselves. They found those things and they imbued them with gifts, with fate. They imbued them with inspiration. They imbued them with, life force, and they created from something that existed. They evolved that. They made that ascend into something that is. They took these undifferentiated, unfated logs and made them into the very first Aryan man and woman, and imparted those fundamental spark of life, of animation, of goodly hue, and the blood that flows within our veins. They set that in motion. And we carry a piece of that with us today, inherited from our most ancient grandparents. And I think those are some of the fundamental truths to that story. I would direct you to other episodes of VNS where we talk about how it is displayed in the lore. And there's a lot of times that we talk about that. Any particular question you have on it, because it's nuanced. There's a lot of depth to a lot of it. But those are some of the very fundamental pieces of our creation story that I think are particularly relevant to our existence and to Asatru. We have a number of other little things going on here. Could you share with us? Okay, no, I already got that. All right, so Jordan
Last
Peterson.
one.
Go ahead.
Sorry, last one.
Nope,
I got court in the morning, so
okay.
This is the last one.
All right, it is the last one. It's the last one in our queue. It's what we've got. So Jordan Peterson has been saying that individuals who believe in multiple gods have fractured psyches. Is the absence of a unifying force and our psyches in the absence of a unifying force and are susceptible to depression, anxiety, etc. Thoughts?
He's wrong.
Yes.
About that. He's wrong about that. If that were a correct statement, there would be no Christians who are depressed.
So Jordan Peterson is also less than honest about his faith. I have read things by him, and I've also listened to him in a number of interview contexts, and he's always very uncomfortable talking about religion in terms of actual devotional religious practice. He's brilliant in finding analogy in Bible stories. And I think he does a masterful job of imbuing those with lessons and with sense and with, really plausible and interesting, meta narratives. But he doesn't talk about his devotion to Jehovah and his love for Jesus. And I think he is fundamentally religious in an archetypal, abstract, ultimately atheistic sense. And I think he is much less comfortable embracing his religiosity in a overtly devotional, personal, Jesus is my Lord and Savior, and Jehovah is God the Father, and I love him and worship him. You never hear Jordan Peterson talk in that way. And maybe he does privately and just isn't comfortable expressing that publicly. Maybe he's in the midst of spiritual evolution that way. I always get the sense when he speaks that he is in a process of learning and growing that way. But yeah, if the gods are just psychological constructs, then I see his preference for the unity that comes in a monotheistic, unifying psychological construct than in multiple conflicting archetypical forces. But that's not what we're dealing with. We're dealing with gods.
And I don't mean your own will is that unifying force. Your own ensoulment is the way of navigating through these waters.
Yes, and it's much less comfortable when you have agency and you are responsible for making choices. When you are responsible for being the hero or the villain on your own, and not because it's the will of God or because the devil made you do it, but because you are choosing to live nobly or ignobly and being judged by our gods. No, I think that Jordan Peterson, like I said, he looks at the gods in a psychological, archetypical sense. I do think, I was following a little bit of the chat, I do think he follows, Jung in that sense. But again, that's fundamentally misunderstanding. And what I'll say is, that is a step away from just casual atheism. But oftentimes when you have educated people that come from a non-religious background, they have to somehow they're in an uncomfortable spot where they want to make religion fit into what they perceive as reality. And so they attempt to drag the gods down to them so that they can understand better, as opposed to elevating them towards the gods and reaching up, trying to grasp them in a closer way. So yeah, I think he's confused. Our gods exist. My mental state doesn't affect their existence.
Right. And I think your analysis is spot on, which is especially ironic because I heard him talking on Joe Rogan about practicing Kundalini yoga. So, that seems to be inherently contradictory.
Well, it's one of those things. He'll science it out. There's this breath, and he'll talk about all the physiological things, but he doesn't talk about the spiritual ascension of the fire serpent. He talks about the science because that's his comfort zone, and he's educated in that. He is a professional in that field. That's where he is comfortable. But no, I think he's, I don't think he is simply inaccurate in that assessment. And I think it often comes from a very uninformed space. I would be very curious how much Jordan Peterson knows certainly about Asatru. I think that he,
I think we ought to look him up and have a conversation with him.
I would love to have a conversation with Jordan Peterson. That would be fantastic. Honestly, I think he'd be a fascinating guy to talk with, to have a beer with, to have dinner with, or to have, any kind of on here kind of discourse with. He's got other things he's doing, I'm sure, but that would be, I think he'd be a fascinating guy.
What could be better than this?
And that's a fine question, Alan. There's things with more viewership than this, but better, I think that's in the eye of the beholder. But yeah, if Dr. Peterson would like to be on the program, he should contact me and we can make something happen. Shoot, he can come over and have dinner and I'll share some Chianti with him. That said,
we'll send you a bottle of mead if he comes.
There you go. That's the last question we have for this evening. Alan, thank you so much for joining us once again and giving us your your perspective on these things and sharing your wisdom with our audience. You know, you're one of my closest friends, and it's always good to get a chance to sit and talk with you. And hopefully it's been beneficial to all of you guys out there joining us this evening. Any preview of what next month's Adulting with Allen might hold for us?
Nope.
All right. We'll have to wait in suspense with bated breath until the next exciting edition of Adulting with Allen. In the meantime, next week, Svan and I will join you again for part 6 of our Volsunga Saga series. Thank you guys so much for your generosity, for sticking with us, for your questions, for your participation, for all you add to what we're doing. We're living in a really special time. If you're hearing this, tell other folks that might benefit from this. Send them here. Word of mouth helps. And if you are a heterosexual white person that is listening to this, consider joining the Asatru Folk Assembly. We're doing amazing things. We would love to have you with us as we move victoriously into the future. Till next week. Hail the folk. Till next week, hail the ICEER, hail the folk, hail the AFA, and remember, victory never sleeps.